There are two ways to think about how memory works: association-based memory and direct memory. Computers use direct memory and humans think in associations. Understanding the differences matters because it impacts how you both apply information and how you consume it. Making and accessing direct memories requires an exact match, comparing one record at a time to the current one in order to determine if there's a pattern. Direct memories don't deal with shades of gray or fragments. They're slow. Association-based memories work much less methodically, instead anchoring new memories to mere similarities. They are great at processing incomplete or inconclusive information and will inevitably pattern new information with something already in memory. The buildup of association-based patterns is how we get our intuition. Intuition is the codification of association. It happens nearly instantly and subconsciously because it requires only the association to something that's in our memory storage. Intuition is essentially subconscious pattern matching. If pattern matching happens mostly at a subconscious level, it's based on what's stored in our minds. So we can reasonably say that to improve our thinking, we need to improve the content of our associative memory and our pattern matching skills. Improving both of these is a function of improving the sources of information we consume. When we fill our minds with other people's gists, summaries, or advice on what to do, we're consuming their abstractions. The problem with abstractions is that they require an exact match to be useful. We have knowledge, but it's limited and domain dependent, so we can't exactly apply it outside of the match in which we learned it. We memorize, but we can't apply. Now you can see why so much of the information we put into our heads, even if it makes us feel smart, is useless. When, however, we fill our minds with rich and comprehensive direct sources of material, we start to build up a database of detailed information. By reflecting on this information, we can create our own abstractions, allowing us to match new information with associations in our subconscious. This is how we can intelligently prepare our minds to pattern match in advance. When we understand with deep fluency, we can associatively and subconsciously match the current situation with rich mental database. Quality information that we abstract ourselves allows us to supercharge our pattern recognition skills and our thinking. Since detailed knowledge is the foundation of associative learning and thinking, we need to collect as much of it as we can. The only caveat I want to add is that because associations are not an exact match, it's important to manually verify before acting. The higher the stakes, the more you need to double check that your intuition is matching to the right pattern. Improving our association-based memories in terms of both content and capabilities will help us make better decisions. As my friend Peter Kaufman says, the greater a person's store of relevant facts, the more efficient and effective their thinking is. This is why the Knowledge Project is a long-form podcast where I don't interrupt the guest. I'm trying to get as much rich, detailed, first-hand knowledge as I can by asking deeper questions than the headlines. Now you know why. In driver's education, we learned that when you're driving on a freeway at high speeds, you need to keep a pocket open in front of you in case someone unexpectedly veers into your lane or stops abruptly. Keeping extra distance between cars allows you to keep options open for whatever might happen. This is the same reason for waiting as long as possible when making an important decision. You want to give yourself as many options as possible in the future so that if something changes, you have the space to move and position yourself in the path of greatest opportunity. In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 powerful techniques to give your future self as many options as possible when you're gathering more information. The first way to preserve optionality while gathering information is to invert the situation and avoid the worst outcome. Let me give you an example. In January of 1986, the Challenger mission was scheduled to take off in just a few short weeks. NASA was trying to establish the space shuttle as a regular and reliable way to conduct commercial and scientific missions in space. Their launch schedule was incredibly ambitious. NASA and President Ronald Reagan had coordinated to have the launch on the same day as the State of Union address. The plan was for it to be a spectacular media event. They had schools across the country lined up to receive their first science lessons from outer space. Weeks before the launch, during a pre-flight meeting, engineers were shouting and in tears, begging NASA to postpone. 2 engineers knew that the temperatures predicted for the day of the launch were too cold for the O-rings to successfully function. They'd never been tested at temperatures that low. They knew the icy temperatures would cause the O-rings on the ship to fail, and they knew the result would likely be a catastrophe. Delay the launch, they begged. They wanted time to fix the problem or wait for warmer launch temperatures, but no amount of bargaining seemed to matter. The manager responsible for overseeing safety responded to their pleas with, "When do you want me to launch? Next April?" The engineers were overruled. The Challenger spacecraft exploded just 73 seconds after takeoff. They had the information, but they misweighed it because they weren't concerned about avoiding the worst case outcome. They were overly focused on the best case outcome and ensuring the president wasn't disappointed by a launch postponement. Had any single decision maker avoided the worst possible scenario, everything on that day would have been different. Launching a rocket is a consequential and irreversible decision. In decision making, especially in high consequence decisions, you might not know the route to the best outcome, but if you can avoid the worst outcome, you get to maintain the options and keep playing the game, to keep deciding. By avoiding the worst possible scenario, you preserve optionality. When you don't know how to achieve something and you're gathering more information, eliminate the options that lead to what you don't want to have happen, or do what allows you to avoid the very worst outcome. So fear and worry have their role in decision making. You can use them to get specific about the worst case scenario. Pause and get clear. What's the worst outcome for the decision you're making? Think about the Challenger mission. The worst case scenario they planned for was not being able to launch on time. The true worst case outcome was that the space shuttle exploded on live TV and killed 7 crew members. What options must you take to avoid the worst outcome? Because the team proceeded as if the delay was the worst outcome on the Challenger mission, they moved forward with the launch. If they optimized for avoiding an explosion, they would have delayed the launch, either waiting for better weather or an O-ring fix. What options are left over when you don't do what leads to the worst outcomes? If launching on a freezing temperature day leads to the worst outcome, eliminate it. Now you can choose on focusing on fixing the O-ring problem or waiting for warmer weather, and how to message it as a success to the American people who have been waiting for the launch. Shoot bullets before cannonballs. One of the biggest risks of deciding before we gather all the information we need is being overly invested in one option. If our business depends on the success of one project, if it fails, the consequences are higher. If we're thinking about changing careers and we quit before finding another job, the consequences are higher. We can keep our future options open by taking as many small, low-risk steps towards as many options as possible before committing all of our energy into one option. In Great by Choice, authors Morton Hansen and Jim Collins call this shooting bullets before cannonballs. This is an excerpt from their book. Picture yourself at sea, a hostile ship beating down on you. You have a limited amount of gunpowder. You take all of your gunpowder and use it to fire a big cannonball. The cannonball flies out over the ocean and misses the target, off by 40 degrees. You turn to your stockpile and discover that you're out of gunpowder. You die. But suppose instead that when you see the ship beating down on you, you take a little bit of gunpowder and fire a bullet. It misses by 40 degrees. You load another bullet and fire. It misses by 30 degrees. You load a third bullet and fire, missing only by 10 degrees. The next bullet hits, ping, the hull of the oncoming ship. Now you take all of the remaining gunpowder and fire the big cannonball along the same line of sight, which sinks the enemy ship. You live. At the beginning of the decision-making process, when you have multiple options to pursue, the best bet is to pursue as many possible without investing too much time, money, or energy in any particular option. A small example of this approach was done by a client of mine who we'll call Solomon. Solomon was looking to hire someone to run his manufacturing business so he could step down and pursue other opportunities. He had tried twice to choose CEOs in the past to replace him, but both times the candidates were great on paper, but didn't work out well with his team. Instead of trying the same sequence again of investing heavily in one CEO and turning down other qualified candidates, I asked him if there was any small test projects that we could run to try 2 to 3 of his top candidates at the same time to see how they performed in real life. We created a relatively small experimental project the company needed to investigate. Recommendations on whether or not to switch their product from Wi-Fi connectivity to cellular and which provider to choose. Each candidate would get to tour the manufacturing facilities, meet the team, and be paid to provide their recommendations on the Wi-Fi cellular issue within 2 weeks. The company was already planning on moving forward with switching over their products to cellular connectivity, so they were paying for what could have ended up being redundant work. They also paid all 3 candidates fair compensation for their time. But I knew that seeing the CEOs in action and being able to evaluate the work they delivered would be multitudes more insightful than their resumes or interviews. The candidates who had the least impressive resume was far and away the best with the team. They also quickly developed the best rapport with the cellular company and found recommendations that ended up saving Solomon's company more than he had paid for all of the research combined. By doing the small simultaneous tests up front, you give yourself as much optionality in the future without having to commit entirely to one option now. Thinking about medical school, shadow a doctor or a resident for a day. Take the MCAT and see what your score is, or apply to colleges and see what you get into. Thinking about a new career, try doing it a few nights per week first. Thinking about launching a new product, see if people are willing to pay for it before you build it. See if you can try a tiny test of the solution. In other words, shoot a bullet and calibrate to see if it truly holds up to your assumptions before fully committing and shooting a cannonball. Doing so will give you the most information while you're deciding and help you keep the bulk of your resources open for when you're ready to act. The final technique for giving yourself more options in the future is to simply live with the decision before you announce it. Have you ever sent an email that took hours to craft, which seemed just right in the moment, and then instantly regretted it as soon as you hit send? I have, and it's the worst feeling in the world. Most leaders want to announce a decision the moment they made it. This is natural. They want to show others how decisive they are, but announcing right away can be like the email you can't undo. Once a decision is made, we often rush to show the world how decisive we are, as if to say, look, I made a decision. Once we announce a decision, though, the ball starts moving. People start acting. The choice becomes hard to unwind. Wouldn't it be nice if there was an undo button? That's why I created a rule that I'd sleep on almost all major decisions before telling anyone. This works particularly well for who decisions, that is, people decisions. Living with the decision before announcing it allows us to do a few things. First, we can check in with our rational brain and verify our assumptions. Maybe we're promoting someone and we're worried about their ability to lead the meeting and organize the team. Living the decision allows us to ask them to organize a meeting beforehand and see what happens so we can calibrate it if we need to. Second, we start to see information in a new light. Once we've mentally made the decision, even if we haven't communicated it to other people, we start to see things differently. All the incoming information gets filtered as if the decision was already made. This can often help us see nuances that we might have missed that may impact how we implement the decision. Finally, if we live with the decision on our own for a day or even 2, we can check in with our emotional selves. Does this decision feel good in our bodies? Do our brains and our heart and our guts all agree? Most decisions will feel fine, but a handful won't. And if it doesn't feel right, it's a sign that something is off and you need to dig deeper before announcing your decision. By keeping the decision to yourself before executing, you gain the time to have an undo moment, check in with our emotional brain, and gather information in a new light right up into the last possible moment instead of after. Living with the decision before you announce it allows you to check in with both your rational and emotional brains, something we rarely do when making a decision, and yet something we need to do in order to have peace of mind. When you're waiting as long as possible to gather information and decide because no clear choice has arisen, put yourself in the position that gives you the most options in the future by using these techniques. Avoid the worst case scenario, shoot bullets before cannonballs, and live with the decision a bit before announcing it. Preserving options can look like you're missing out. It can be hard to watch as others are taking action, even when those actions don't make sense for you. Our ego doesn't mind failure as long as we're part of a crowd. But when you put outcomes over ego, you want to be correct rather than quick. That means you have to be willing to look bad from time to time. There's a great quote that I used to have in my office by the baseball player Lou Brock, who said, "Show me a man who's afraid to look stupid, and I'll show you a man I can beat every time." Most of us are unwilling to preserve optionality because it makes us look stupid in the short term. But if you look at the most successful people in the world, they've all looked short-term stupid on a number of occasions. More often than not, they were just preserving options and waiting for the right time to act. One of my favorite examples is at the height of the tech bubble in the late 1990s. Warren Buffett was on the cover of Time magazine with a headline that read, "He's lost his touch." At the time, Buffett had sat out most of the dot-com craze, appearing to miss out on the stampeding bull market that came with it. He may have looked like an idiot for a few years until the bubble burst, but he had a tremendous cash reserve when it did. If you do what other people are doing, you're going to get the same results that everyone else gets. If you don't know what to do, keep your options open while you gather more information, reduce your blind spots, and gain clarity on your desired outcome. Let's make this a bit more personal. If you don't know where to invest your money, a savings account with a 2% yield is better than nothing and allows you to have liquid assets for when the right opportunity comes. If you don't know if quitting your job is the right decision, gather more information. Maybe all you know is you don't like your current job, and if you quit before you have a new job lined up, you lose the option to make this one work. Instead, you can start applying for new jobs so you have a real choice and something to compare your current opportunity to. If you're considering a move to a new city, book a rental there first. Spend a few weeks getting the feel for the place, then decide whether it's right for you. Give yourself optionality for the future and defer the decision until you have the best information. In the meantime, if you have to make a decision, make the smallest decision possible and choose what continues to give you the most options while preparing for the widest possible range of reasonable outcomes. Okay, let's recap. While you're waiting to decide, you can preserve optionality by naming and avoiding the worst possible outcomes. You can preserve optionality by testing as many options simultaneously as possible, shooting bullets before cannonballs. And you can preserve optionality by living with the decision before you actually announce it. The skill of keeping the future open is going to give you a strategic advantage while you move through this program. You now see why we're going slow, why we're evaluating all of our options, and how to keep your options open while giving you the best information to decide with. If you did nothing else in this program, implementing this technique that you've learned in this lesson alone would put you ahead of 80% of decision makers I know, moving from a reactive decision maker to one in control of your choices. Now that you have the foundation, you'll know exactly when it's time to act. And if you do act and discover information that would have changed your decision, you can do it without regret. Knowing you had a process and a plan, you can iterate over time. It may have been a while, but everyone has experience working for someone who's hard to please. No matter what you submit to them, it's just not quite good enough. Sometimes this type of leadership sinks businesses, and other times it drives them to their absolute best. The difference? A vision of the solution. Imagine a boss who, no matter what you do or submit, is displeased. He gives off that something could be better, but doesn't communicate the specifics of what that is or how to get there. All he knows, or at least all he communicates, is that he doesn't like it. Now imagine a similar boss who, no matter what you do or submit, still finds criticism. But she also tells you what the gap is and what she wants to see in order for you to move closer to her vision. The feeling is completely different. When someone is displeased but we don't know why, we don't know what to do next, so we feel discouraged and overwhelmed. When someone is displeased but knows exactly what they want and communicates it to us, we might still feel overwhelmed by the gap, but we feel empowered to take action. We know the most important thing for this project, and we know the one thing that frames the problem. A simpler example of how often we don't articulate what we need is choosing a restaurant to eat out with a group of friends. I've seen this play out the same way so often it's almost comical. Pay attention the next time you're in this situation. Someone will make an initial suggestion like eating Mexican, and inevitably somebody will say, "I'm just not in the mood for that," or "I just had Mexican last night." Then it's, "What about salads?" And someone will say, "I'm too hungry for a salad." And on ad nauseum. People will say what they don't want until the group is so hungry they go to whatever restaurant is most convenient. How often do we treat our own lives and problems like the boss who's simply displeased or the friend who only knows what they don't want, without a clear picture of where we want to go? As the old saying goes, if you don't know where you want to go, any road will get you there. What if when you asked your friends where they wanted to eat, everyone in the group said what they did want? I want somewhere that serves salads within 10 minutes walking distance. I want somewhere that serves burgers. I really don't care. I just want to eat soon. Picking a place to go would be much faster and much more likely to get people what they want. In practice, knowing the most important thing is often value-based. If you're a leader, it's clarifying and empowering to have your team know what you value. In a company, it might be serving the customers is the most important thing. Being profitable becomes secondary. Therefore, if someone has to choose between those two and you're not around, they know what to choose. When you know the most important thing with clarity, the metrics for what you're delivering become crystal clear, and how it'll be judged also becomes crystal clear. This is incredibly empowering. But learning to become aware of and name what we do want is a skill, and it takes some practice. When we practice getting clear on our objectives and values, we not only set the trajectory for where we want to go, we give ourselves a way to measure progress throughout our decision-making process, so we know exactly when we're off track. It's critically important to do this if you're leading a group, so they can decide without you. If you're directing a team of leaders, you want to be clear on the values they are to use in making decisions. If I tell you the most important thing is serving the customer, you know how to make a decision without me. If you make a bad judgment call, but it puts the customer first, I can't fault you. You did what I wanted. If you don't articulate the most important thing, people are left guessing about what matters, and because they're guessing, they need you. And if you're new to leading people, this might feel good. You convince yourself that people can't decide without you, when the reality is people can't decide because of you. You're the bottleneck, and you're not developing the judgment of others. When people know what the most important value is, they know how to make decisions. Not only is this an important aspect of leadership, but it's an important aspect of leading your team. You have to pick one thing above all the others and communicate it in a way that people can understand so they can make decisions. This is true leadership. Let's try it now. For this exercise, I recommend getting some sticky notes or small individual pieces of paper. First, on each sticky note or individual piece of paper, write out one objective or one thing that's important to you about the decision you're making. For example, before I decided to invest in Pixel Union, one of the largest web design agencies in the Shopify universe, I wrote down some objectives that were important to me. They included: be a win-win for employees, customers, and shareholders; grow rather than shrink the business; work with people I trust; not having to manage people or add more to my plate; not borrow money; and earn a decent return on investment. There are many more, but you get the idea. Place only one objective on each piece of paper, because next up we're going to make your objectives battle. Choose whichever objective you think is the most important to you and place it on a wall if it's a sticky note or a table if it's not. Then grab another objective and compare the two and ask, if I absolutely had to choose between only these two objectives, which one matters more? So to return to my example of investing in a company, it might be not having to manage people or add more to my plate, compared with earn a return on my investment. If I could only have one of these, earning a return on my investment but having to manage people to do so, or not having to manage people but not making money as a result, which would it be? I'd choose to earn money while also knowing that I have to manage people and move that objective higher, but knowing that I'd only be willing to do so with a certain threshold. Which leads us to the next step, adding quantities. This makes it real and forces you to quantify your thinking. As your objectives battle one another, you will find that quantities matter. Add them to each objective as they battle. Let's say that in my investment example, I started with not having to manage people. But as I rank my objectives, I find I'm willing to spend 5 to 10 additional hours per week managing people, so as long as the ROI is over 100K per year. If it's over 10 hours per week, the ROI would have to be 200K. And if I have to manage people 20 hours per week, it would no longer be worth it to me, regardless of the return. When you start comparing things and thinking about how much you'll pay for them, you gain a lot of clarity around what really matters and what doesn't. Then move on to the next objective. In sequence from top to bottom, make your objectives battle one another for priority, adding the quantities that matter to you along the way. Often, when doing this exercise, people will look at a pair of objectives and think, I don't necessarily have to choose between these two. Make them battle anyway. Maybe in real life, you can meet both objectives. You can get a high ROI while investing in a socially responsible company. Or you can get in shape and still eat out on 3 dates a week. Or you can buy a house in a great location that fits your budget. But often, as we begin to pursue an option, we find that we have to choose one objective over another, even if only slightly so. Make them battle now to give yourself a clear path when the decision is at hand. Find the most important thing. Setting these priorities for your objectives doesn't just have to be related to the decisions you have at hand. You can do this for your values, your goals in life, and your relationships. It's a quick way of creating your own compass for what's important to you or your business. Once you've done this, you'll have identified the most important thing in each area of your life. You'll have a North Star to evaluate all of your options by. Complete this exercise before moving on to the next lesson. See you soon. You've now walked through all angles of the problem. You've evaluated the possible paths and their consequences. You've put in place tripwires and margins of safety so you're prepared for the widest range of outcomes. But there's still one step left: execution. We've arrived at the skill that requires us to act. For many of us, this is the final piece that so far has barred us from arriving at where we want to be. We all know what it's like to say aloud the words that put a decision into motion that we've pondered for months. It can be a little like standing on the edge of a cliff. We all know that feeling of our heart racing, our stomach dropping, and this stream of self-talk that either backs us off the ledge or gets us to jump. There's a video I absolutely love that shows this self-talk process beautifully. Let's watch it quickly.
I'll be fine.
Have fun.
I'll do it. Well, here goes something, I guess. Okay, you can do this. I'm gonna jump. I got it.
It's fine. You'll be fine.
Okay. Here
The longer you wait, you'll be more scared.
I go.
She might be young, but her experience is similar to all of us when we take risks and commit to a course of action, especially when it's consequential. She's trying to sort out in her own way if she has what it takes to do this. When she starts, she's gathering info, telling herself, here goes something, I guess. You can hear her breathing change as she moves into determining if she can do it, what she's afraid of. She can externalize the inner dialogue that we all have as we strive to do things we've never done before. In this lesson, we're going to learn the skills that help us commit and jump, even when we're afraid or a little uncomfortable. We can be as logical, rational, and strategic in our decision-making as possible, but in that moment of executing and committing, there are uncomfortable sensations for many of us. We can't avoid them, but we can learn how to be less affected by them, and we can learn how to move forward even when we're afraid. After all, courage isn't the ability to overcome fear or anxiety, it's the ability to execute even when those sensations are present. We'll move through this skill set chronologically, starting with the skill that's most helpful the furthest out from executing: positive self-talk. In the video of the little girl and the ski jump, you can hear how she talks to herself before the jump. She says to herself, I'll be fine, I can do this, I'm going to do this, I got it. As we age, we typically shift to making our self-talk internal. But even as adults, we go through the same process. We talk to ourselves in the shower or on the commute into work. We talk to ourselves about what we want to do and why. We talk to ourselves about why it's important and what we're capable of. And that stream of self-talk can either help us achieve our goals or keep us from acting. Craig Weller is a former United States Special Warfare combatant crewman who spent nearly 2 years on the high threat protection team for the US ambassador to Baghdad in Iraq. Among many other things, he now helps train and prepare people looking to get into the toughest special operations courses in the world. His clients have a 90% success rate. The average success rate for most of the other people is closer to 10%. He's an expert in executing in high-pressure situations and in training people how to execute in them. He recounted in an article on OAF Nation that when he joined the Navy and volunteered for Special Operations Selection, he did so without knowing how to swim. Swimming is obviously a large component of being part of the Navy, especially the Special Forces. In the article, he says he barely passed the screen test for swimming by only 7 seconds. That was after failing twice. If you're like most of us, you've experienced failure at least once in the past. Often, when we are in the middle of something that is taxing every resource we have, we do what Craig did while in the pool. Over and over again, he would tell himself while swimming, this sucks, I'm a failure, I'm gonna drown. Shit, that guy just passed me. That sucks, this sucks. And every time he swam, he came in dead last. That is until he tried to figure out what he could do to improve his performance. And he knew that his self-talk was the first place to start. Now, after years of training, he learned ways to include positive self-talk when he's in challenging situations. And positive self-talk is something he uses when training his clients too. When someone starts lagging mid-workout, they're asked, what are you telling yourself? According to Craig, all the strategists in the world won't improve your performance if you're already convinced yourself that you're going to fail. Self-talk is often the limiting factor that must be cleared before further improvements can be made. So let's start with awareness around our own narratives when a consequential, irreversible, or volatile decision arises. Do you know what you typically tell yourself? Pause now to jot down what you tell yourself if you're aware of it. Now, I've executed on decisions where the night before I couldn't sleep. My stomach churned, things seemed dark and hard, and even though I knew the right choice, I was afraid. The technique that's personally helped me the most when I'm in these places is to remind myself of the things I've already survived. When I got divorced, it was the worst feeling I'd ever experienced. I thought everything was over. I told myself my dreams would never come true. I told myself my kids wouldn't adapt. I told myself I'd never be happy again. I told myself I failed and that I was a failure. And frankly, I told myself a lot more. The failure was all I could see. I was in a negative mind. That was my narrative. I wasn't confident and I wasn't in a place to make decisions. And yet, life wasn't going to wait for me either. Now, looking back, I know I survived. It wasn't always pretty, but I made it through. I bent, but didn't break. The fact that you're in this position to decide right now as you're watching this lesson means you've already survived things you maybe didn't even expect to survive. You've overcome challenges and you're still here. When I'm in a stream of self-talk that isn't helping me execute, it's helpful for me to remind myself of each of the decisions, challenges, risks, and terrible days I've already survived. Confidence comes from what you say to yourself. It's your self-talk. To grossly oversimplify things, there are 3 different mindsets: negative, positive, and none. The negative mind encourages self-sabotage. We're pessimistic, cynical, and closed. We're self-critical and full of worry. The positive mind is optimistic with a lot of swag. No mind is the zone. There are no thoughts. We just are. This is all of us at our highest level of performance. The work you need to do is to recognize when you're stuck in a negative mind, and when we're there at times, we really need to work to get to a positive mind. You can't go from a negative mind to no mind. That's not how it works, but you can go from a positive mind to no mind. When you're in a negative mind, ask yourself what thoughts will get you over to the positive mind. Now, these thoughts will have to be earned. While you might be able to fake it till you make it with other people, you can't do that with yourself. You have to put in the work to make your talk credible and realistic. Think about putting in the hard work as earning the right to be positive. The best way to speak credibly to yourself is to think about what you've already done. I'd like you to take a moment now to pause, reflect, and write down the hardest things you've already overcome. Go ahead, do that now. You've been in difficult situations. You've been in uncomfortable situations. You've experienced hardship. And when you were there before, your worst fears didn't come true, and they likely won't this time. You survived, you came through it. You can do this because you've done it before. When I see my own personal list, I'm reminded that I've earned the right to be positive. That doesn't mean everything will be smooth, only that I know I can handle it if it's not. And when the things outside of my control have gone terribly, I still survived, and you will too. So to recap, how do you change your thoughts from negative to positive? First, recognize where you are. Second, identify the thoughts. Ask yourself if they're true and to what extent they are true. Third, remind yourself of something you did successfully to turn on your positive brain. Build yourself back up. And finally, repeat. One positive thought about a past success won't help much if it's buried in 10,000 negative ones about your failures. So you need to remind yourself often of the times you got it right. Here's what that looks like in practice. When I'm at my worst, the stories I tell myself are that I'm a fraud, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve this. And when these thoughts become pervasive, they run around me, trapping me. The first step is to recognize I'm in a negative mind. And the second step is to ask myself if that's real. Am I really a fraud? No. Are my negative thoughts 100% right? No. Third, remind yourself what you say when it's good to be you. I tell myself, I've got this. But it's not enough to tell yourself you've got this. You have to show yourself. Think of a specific time in your life when you said that and it was true. For me, a recent example is launching this course. What gives me the right to say I've got this? It's the preparation I've done for the past 10 years. Now I've started to move from negative mind to positive mind. A disciplined mind isn't given to you by default. It's earned. You have to do the lonely work. Now, I want you to work through an example for yourself. Work through all of the 4 steps. What are you being negative about now? Ask yourself if it's 100% true, move to a positive thought, and back it up with evidence. Pause the video. Now you're starting to intelligently prepare for shifting your negative mind. You're developing a framework to work from when you catch yourself beating yourself up. You are your most important coach. Whether it's leading up to execution in the moment of pressing go, or sometime afterwards when things get hard. If you notice yourself in a stream of negative self-talk, I want you to follow the simple plan. Recognize, ask yourself if it's 100% true, build yourself up, and back it up. Doing this helps me execute even when I'm scared. I hope it will help you too. I just want to briefly touch on the idea of no mind or flow state. Even if you haven't been in this specific situation before, it doesn't matter. If you've done the work to get into a positive mind, when you're in a situation that requires you to respond, you're more likely to be able to access your no mind. There's a classic book about the psychology of sport called The Inner Game of Tennis. In it, the author W. Timothy Galloway explains what this no mind state is like and how to get there. When we're performing at our best, everything becomes effortless. We act without thinking or even giving ourselves time to think. We stop judging our actions as good or bad and observe them as they are. And then we get done what we need to. Alex Honnold, the guy from Free Solo who climbed El Capitan, has this to say when faced with the situation where you run out of skills. I don't know, you pee yourself, you improvise, or you just deal. You just rise to the occasion. I do often think about rising to the occasion because of a lot of climbing is that sort of adventuring, particularly in the big mountains, going on trips to Antarctica where you're suddenly doing something that you've never technically done before and you don't exactly know that you can do it, but you just sort of have this confidence that I'm a good climber and I will figure this out. Now we've arrived at the moment when we go from choosing to acting. We've made the choice. We've checked in with our rational and emotional selves and lived with it. And now we're ready to say the words out loud, sign the paperwork, send the email, or take the action that requires us to commit. No matter where you're starting from mentally, no matter how prepared we are, we still might be struggling with our emotions. In all situations, if we need help, we can access the breath. Watching the child make the decision to go down the ski jump, you can imagine the surge of stress her body was subjected to. Under that kind of stress, we shake. The butterflies in our stomach take flight, and we get ready to fight or run. Our focus narrows to only the most relevant information used for fighting or running, and we begin to take short, rapid breaths. If we're being chased by a lion, this response would be helpful. That's exactly what we want for a short burst of energy or adrenaline. But if we're in a boardroom, that type of stress impacts the way we perceive the problem we're facing. We get stressed, we breathe differently, and then we get even more stressed. Every breathing state has an emotional state, and every emotional state has a breathing state. If we can improve one, we can improve the other. A large number of studies have shown diaphragmatic breathing improves attention and cortisol levels. In Breathing for Warriors, Brian Sabin writes, a relationship between emotional well-being and the quality of one's breathing mechanics has always been evident, but complex. He later goes on to add, what's indisputably true is this: stressed out, depressed, and anxious people often have bad breathing mechanics and patterns. And people with bad breathing patterns are often stressed out, depressed, and anxious. If you break that pattern of shallow, erratic, vertical breathing, a cascade of benefits often results, including a significant decrease in stress and anxiety. Paying attention to our breathing isn't something woo-woo or new age. It's a technique used by special forces, crisis responders, and elite athletes, and it's backed by science. So if you're in a position where you can do absolutely nothing else, you can breathe. Let's try just one simple exercise now. Our goal of this exercise is to move our breath from the up and down vertical shoulder movement into our diaphragm. This is the way we used to breathe when we were children. One simple way to tell if you're breathing with your diaphragm is to place one hand on your chest and one on your abdomen. Sit with your breath for a moment and just notice where you're feeling movement. Most of us tend to breathe into our chest. We want instead to move the breath into our abdomen. One way to think about this is if your abdomen is a balloon that you want to inflate with each breath. Think about that cue and try a few more breaths. Now I'd like to share with you box breathing. Developed by retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine, box breathing is an incredibly simple breathing pattern that can help reduce anxiety and help you execute when things get tough. It's what the military operators use on big missions, and it's being taught to firefighters and EMS personnel. It's called a box breath because you're doing each step of the breath for the same amount of time. So you'll inhale to a count of 4, hold the breath in for 4, exhale to the count of 4. and then hold the bottom of the exhale for a count of 4. Let's try it together now for a few rounds. If you can master your self-talk and your breathing, it doesn't matter which high-stakes decision you enter into or the results of it. You'll be better prepared to handle it and recover. Moving from negative to positive mind, focusing on your breath, and bringing yourself back to the here and now, these are the things that help build resilience and confidence. Throughout this program, you've taken incredible steps to develop yourself as a better thinker, leader, and decision maker. You've developed a skill set to approach any decision or challenge and face it head on. You know how to find the best opportunities and prepare for the worst outcomes. With the practice of these skills over time, you'll develop a sort of unshakable resilience, no matter what the outcomes are. The final step is to take what you've learned through this process and improve your decision-making over time, gaining the self-awareness of where you can grow and become a perpetually better decision-maker. That's the last skill in this program, and it's coming up next. Imagine you're driving to a board meeting that you've been preparing for over the last month. The organization you helped start has been financially devastated during the past year. The meeting is to discuss options for salvaging it. Your alarm didn't wake you up and you ran out the door without eating breakfast. On the way to the meeting, a teenager looking at their phone comes out of nowhere and crosses the street. You slam on your brakes to miss them. They repay you by scowling in your direction. Your heart is racing when you pull up to the office building. In 2 minutes, the meeting will start where you'll be asked to get deeply creative about how to save the organization you love and decide where to spend the remaining budget. What's the first thing you do? Most of us will rush into the meeting as soon as possible. We make it in the nick of time. We try to pretend like we have everything together. We spend the first 10 minutes wondering if people notice how sweaty and out of breath we are and how we don't even hear what's going on. No matter how smart you are, no matter how prepared you are, you're not going to make good decisions in this situation. There are certain circumstances that are breeding grounds for huge mistakes. Here's just a few examples. In 1999, Yo-Yo Ma, the world's most famous cello player, was headed to a concert at the Anchorage in Brooklyn. He was in a rush and forgot his $2.5 million cello in the trunk of a cab he took to the venue. In March of 1977, 2 large airliners, one from KLM and one from Pan Am, both carrying hundreds of passengers, crashed into each other in the middle of the runway, killing 583 people. Not in flight, not from bad engineering, from completely avoidable mistakes. The KLM jet was even piloted by a person who had just finished teaching safety seminars to KLM pilots. In 2004, Matt Emmon was about to win the gold medal in the Olympics for rifle shooting. He was far ahead of the competition and didn't even need to hit a bullseye to win. If he got even moderately close to the bullseye, he would take home the gold. Then, despite hitting exactly where he was aiming, he lost. His aim was perfect, but he forgot to check which target was in his lane. He shot the wrong target entirely. You can be the smartest and most prepared person in the room, but certain predictable situations will reduce or eliminate this advantage. Why? Because certain situations overload our mental processing capability. Unlike inanimate objects which break when under too much stress, our brains can become overwhelmed without us knowing. And when our brains are overwhelmed is precisely the time we are the most likely to overlook or dismiss some bit of crucial information. You could actually define stupidity as overlooking or dismissing conspicuously crucial information. Most of what we're going to talk about in this lesson has been informed by my friend Adam Robinson's work and my many conversations with him. So what are the situations in which we are likely to become overwhelmed and miss something? That is, what are the situations we can identify in advance in ourselves and others that increase the odds of stupidity? First, are you under mental or physical stress? Second, are you distracted by something in the moment? Third, are you operating in a group? Fourth, are you in a rush or feeling urgency? Fifth, are you operating outside of your normal environment? Sixth, is there an expert around? And finally, 7th, do you have too much information? These might seem simple and obvious, and they are. And yet, even the best of us still fall victim to them. Individually, they're more powerful than we imagine, and together they compound to push us past our cognitive limits. Let's explore them briefly. First, are you physically and mentally in the best position to decide? If you've ever raised a toddler or been around one, you know that when they're tired or hungry, there's absolutely no reasoning with them. They are incapable of learning or understanding until you deal with their immediate physical need. Despite being fully grown, we're exactly the same. We might be better at hiding that we're tired or hungry or sick or stressed, but our condition is equally as impacted as the toddlers when our bodies are physically stressed. If you've ever had a fight with your spouse only to find out that after eating or sleeping you don't remember what you were fighting about, you know exactly what I mean. This may seem so simple it's almost stupid, but if you simply check in with your physical body and take care of its immediate needs before making a decision, you'll cut down on a lot of egregious and avoidable conflicts and mistakes. You also aren't likely to make good decisions in the wake of severe and unusual mental stress. If you've just lost a loved one or gone through a bad breakup, you aren't going to be in a great position to make long-term financial decisions. Emotions like acute grief, anger, loneliness, distort our perceptions of reality and negatively impact our cognitive abilities. One context that demonstrates how important it is to check in with yourself before making a decision is addiction recovery. Addicts struggling with the decision or an urge to act on their addiction are encouraged by 12-step programs to check in with their bodies before taking action. They're told that before they make any major decisions to eat if they're hungry, sleep if they're tired, or reach out to someone if they're lonely, and breathe if they're angry. In the 12-step programs, this is called HALT. Are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? Checking in with their physical and mental state helps addicts in recovery remember to stop and take care of their bodies before they make a decision. The same technique is one we can all apply before making big decisions. If our bodies and minds are in a state of physical or mental stress, we're not only more likely to act without thinking things through and close ourselves off to better opportunities as a result, but we're more likely to miss crucial information. When we're hungry or tired, we're also more likely to be combative than cooperative. And something as simple as hunger can impact how we interpret and filter information, impacting our risk-taking threshold, increasing the odds that we miss something important, and increasing the odds that we rush. By being aware of our own physiology first and resolving any unmet needs, we clean the lens through which we view a problem. So check in with yourself before you make a decision. Are you hungry, angry, lonely, tired, or stressed? If so, you're more likely to miss something vital and make a poor decision. I understand that it's easier to eat than process grief, but being aware of how your physical and mental state can affect your ability to make a good decision is critical. If you can't postpone, but you know you're not going to be much better tomorrow, it's important to reach out for help. The key here is when a problem or opportunity presents itself, before you respond, check in with your body. Unless you have extensive training in making decisions when exhausted or while under intense pressure, your response will only be as good as your physiology. So if you have an immediate needs like thirst or hunger or sleep or whatever it is, meet those first. Second, are you fixated or preoccupied with something? We're more likely to overlook crucial things when we're fixated on one thing. In medicine, these are called fixation errors. You concentrate on one thing to the detriment of other, more relevant factors. Someone walks into your office while you're on the phone asking you to sign off on a project. Your spouse called angry with you about a canceled dinner plan. You're ruminating over how you'll respond while being on a deadline to determine your company's personal strategy for the next quarter. In the case of the KLM and Pan Am collision in 1977, evidence from the control tower audio suggests that the operators in control of the tower were watching a soccer match. When we become too focused on one thing, we become blind to other things. Observe the people around you. Where they're looking will tell you where their attention is or isn't. We've all been in meetings where someone is taking notes on their computer and they need every question they're asked to be repeated. We've all been on video conference calls where someone is looking down at their phone instead of at the screen. And we've all tried talking to a child when they're on a tablet or watching TV. If my kids are on their tablet, it doesn't matter if I say something 3 times or 30. If they're not looking at me, they don't hear a word I say. A doctor friend of mine told me recently about a nurse who was so focused on her patient's heart rate, she forgot to double check the patient's IV drip rate, which she was responsible for and nearly caused an emergency before someone else caught it. She was so fixated on the heart rate that she was blind to double checking the drip rate. a standard procedure that she had followed without incident thousands of times before in her career. Third, are you operating in a group? We have a tendency to outsource a lot of our thinking to others, including groups. But because we're social creatures, doing that means we're susceptible to human tendencies like wanting to be liked by the group, being limited by our hierarchy in the group, and more. As Warren Buffett has said, there needs to be more belching in the corporate boardroom. He was discussing group decision-making in the boardroom and how much discussion there was around the CEO's ideas. And he said saying no to the CEO is a little like belching at the dinner table. You can't do it too often. If you do, you find yourself eating in the kitchen pretty soon. The reality is we can only pick so many battles. If you object to everything, even if you rationally disagree, people eventually stop inviting you and no one pays attention to you. So you have to save your ammo for when it really counts and end up compromising on the things you feel are wrong because you mentally are horse trading. Other biases that happen here are groupthink, where we go with an idea because everyone feels good about it, the Abilene paradox, where we commit to a course of action despite no one thinking it's a good idea, commitment and consistency bias, and more. We don't need to know all the details of them all to know that groups raise odds that we're missing something. The other odd thing about groups is we often lack skin in the game that's necessary for us to really care because we know we won't own it. If a group makes a bad decision, we can go back to our individual tribe in the organization and tell them a story, true or not, about how we tried to prevent it. And if the decision happens to be a good one, true or not, we tell our tribe how we nudged everyone to the right conclusion. As you can see with groups, the stories we tell ourselves gives us too much credit and not enough blame. Fourth, another common trap smart people fall into is feeling a sense of urgency. Is it more important to do it right or do it on a deadline? Rushing happens to all of us. The other day I was late for a call at work and ran out of my house and to the office. I skipped my coffee, made it just in the nick of time, or so I had thought. Turns out I had left my phone, wallet, and keys at home. I'm sure this has happened to you too. It's not that rushing caused me to forget my stuff as much as that my focus was fixated on something and I missed something else. Notice how you hyper-focus when you're working on a deadline or you're in a hurry in the morning. Your adrenaline increases, your cortisol increases, you're primed for increased activity and attention. You are in fight or flight mode. And when that happens, our brains are narrowly focused on the preconceived threat, whether it's missing an important meeting or deadline or outrunning a bear. And as a result, we overlook crucial information. Yo-Yo Ma left his multi-million-dollar instrument in a taxi because he was in a rush. The pilot of the KLM jet that crashed into another plane on the runway was in a rush trying to depart after a day of delays. He was racing the clock to take off before being timed out by new regulations. The Challenger mission was on a time crunch, trying to launch by the time President Reagan delivered the State of Union address. Being rushed leads to bad outcomes. But deadlines are almost always negotiable and less important than doing things right. If you notice your heart pounding, that you're running behind, that you're being forced to put a deadline over the quality of the decision, slow down and give yourself and the decision more time, so you're less blind to the other things that are happening. Fifth, are you operating outside of your normal environment? A change in our normal operating environment or structure has a remarkable impact on how our brains operate. Perhaps you've gotten a promotion and have a new office and team, or maybe you're starting to work from home. The autopilot that you've developed that allowed you to handle volumes of information before is no longer automatically and subconsciously processing all of that information in your day. Now it seems like you're paying attention to everything. Think about when you first learned to drive. The first time behind the wheel, there was a flood of new information going through your mind. It took all of your energy to concentrate on what you were doing. In fact, that was part of my driving exam. When we got back, the instructor asked if I noticed the swan on the lawn beside the stop sign. I said no, there was no swan. It was a lawn full of pink flamingos. And this was an indication that driving was becoming autopilot and I had the cognitive capacity to pick up on other things in the environment. Another way to visualize this idea of autopilot is when you first start driving, you can't have a conversation with anyone else without getting distracted. Now, with experience, it's not a problem. But we will turn down the radio when lost because we're outside of our normal operating environment and we need to concentrate. Changes to our routines or environment break the autopilot and awaken the mind, which can redirect our attention away from other more important information. It takes more mental resources to operate outside of our normal environment, and we increase the odds we overlook something important. 6. Are you in the presence of an expert or authority figure? As we mentioned before, we are social animals. Not only do we defer to the wisdom of the group, but we also tend to defer to leaders, experts, and authority figures. Reality is, though, they are just as subject to stupidity as we are. Co-pilots in flight simulators, and unfortunately sometimes in real life, see the pilot making a mistake and don't correct them. They defer to the assumed expertise. This happens every day in our workplace too. I remember once at an executive meeting, our CEO was trying to elicit information to help him decide on the strategy to take the next day in a critical meeting he was going to have with his boss. When he went around the room, everyone told him what he wanted to hear and not what they actually thought. I offered another perspective, one that he didn't want to hear and one that he ultimately didn't take. 2 others who were in the meeting called me that night saying they were glad I voiced another approach, and they agreed with me that that approach was best. I asked each of them, why didn't you speak up in the meeting room? One of them simply said, our CEO is the boss, it's not worth the fight. And the other said, he knows more about this stuff than I do, so I'm sure he thought about it more deeply. Ultimately, our CEO lost his job because he took the wrong approach in that meeting. He didn't make it okay for people to disagree with an authority figure and thereby lost our valuable input. There is an old adage that's wise to understand. Whose bread I eat, his song I sing. If you're the boss, you need to create an environment that lets your team sing a different song to catch you when you're wrong. Finally, are you dealing with too much information? While most of us think that more information is better, our ability to usefully process information has limits. Think about the modern environment we're operating in. Information comes to us in a flood facilitated by technology. We are overwhelmed and we don't know it. All of this information comes with a cost. We have less time and capacity to identify and pay attention to what really matters. As the brilliant Nobel laureate Herbert Simon said, what information consumes is rather obvious. It consumes the attention of its recipients. Hence, a wealth of information creates a poverty of attention and a need to allocate that attention efficiently among the overabundance of information sources that might consume it. Information overload overwhelms the other warning signs. It gives us unwarranted confidence in what we think we know and distracts us from processing the most valuable information. One great thing you can do to become a better decision maker is stop consuming large amounts of useless information. Like we talked about in the skill getting the right information, avoid other people's abstractions and the junk of uninformed opinions. Processing a small amount of high-quality information is far more valuable. Let's quickly recap. The warning signs of stupidity are, first, you're under physical or acute mental stress. Second, you're focused or preoccupied with something. Third, you're operating in the presence of a group. Fourth, you're in a rush. Fifth, you're operating outside of your normal environment. Sixth, you're operating in the presence of an authority figure. And finally, seventh, you have too much information. If you think most of these flags sound like common sense, you'd be right. The question then becomes, why do we frequently fall victim to them? Perhaps we just don't understand how sensitive we are to these factors and how little it takes to push us outside of our optimal performance envelopes. I bet hearing these situations has you thinking hard about the mistakes you've made in your life and how these factors have played a role. Any one of these situations can cause stupidity. When combined, however, they compound, reinforcing one another and dramatically increasing the odds we'll make a terrible decision. To the largest extent possible, you need to learn to recognize when you and others are in these situations and delay making important decisions. Welcome to the final skill. No matter where you are in developing your skill set as a decision maker, the way you'll be able to set yourself apart moving forward is reflecting on each decision you make. Even the best decisions can result in unexpected and unfortunate outcomes. All we can do is learn from them and grow. Coach Pete Carroll of the Seattle Seahawks knows this intimately. In February of 2015, Carroll made a call in the final minutes of Super Bowl 49 that was immediately criticized as a huge mistake. His Seahawks team trailed 28-24, but they were on the New England Patriots' 1-yard line and appeared certain to score. Lined up in Seattle's backfield was Marshawn Lynch, a 215-pound battering ram who was arguably the most dominant running back in the NFL at the time, and who'd already ran for more than 100 yards against the Patriots that day. Here's a quick recap from CBS Sports News that explains what unfolded and how Carroll's decisions continued to be viewed today. What transpired next will live in the annals of the league for as long as football games are played. A bizarre call by Carroll to throw on a second down on a route in a crowded middle of the field will be second guessed just as long, and resulted in Belichick and Tom Brady, the game's MVP, making history with their 4th Super Bowl title together. To the fans in the stands and the other prognosticators worldwide, the right decision seemed obvious. Just hand the ball to beast mode, as Lynch was then known to many. But instead, Carroll asked quarterback Russell Wilson to throw a pass, and the result was disaster. It's been years since that play. There's been a tremendous amount of analysis of it. Why didn't the coach make the easy choice that seems so clear to everyone else? Well, his decision-making process was sound. The results just didn't work out. Based on good information, he was battling against his opponent's weakness. It just didn't work out. Sometimes that's life. In an interview after the game, Carroll was told by an interviewer, everyone is thinking this was the greatest mistake of all time. Carroll's response? No, it was the worst outcome. The right call doesn't always get the intended outcome. Carroll had experienced a terrible outcome, but his confidence was unwavering. Why? Because he knew why he had made the call. He knew his logic was sound. Most of us just look at the results. We assume that good people make good decisions and bad people make bad decisions. We think that good decisions get good results and bad ones don't. But now we can see that's not true. It's more complicated than that. Way back in the beginning of this program, we talked about how learning requires more than just experience. It requires reflection. This lesson is dedicated entirely to helping you develop the skill of reflecting on your decision-making process and experiences so you continue progressing long after the program is over. By reflecting on your own decisions, you become your own coach, identifying the areas that you need to work on and moving yourself forward. You can't just wait for someone to walk up to you and tell you what you need to do or where you're not giving it 100%. You have to do it for yourself. Let's start with a small self-assessment that's in the workbook. In the very beginning of the workbook for this lesson, you'll see a section entirely dedicated to reflecting on 2 decisions. I'd like you to think about 2 decisions you made before enrolling in this program. The harder it was to make each decision, the better. And I'd like you to fill out the scorecard on those 2 decisions. Pause now and go ahead and do that. Okay, welcome back. Let's explore the 2 false indicators of good decision making. You just rated 2 of your past decisions on a scale of 0 to 10. When you determined if these decisions were good or bad, what were you evaluating? Most people rate their decisions based on 2 false indicators, outcomes and feelings. When we evaluate the outcome, we ask questions like, what happened? Was it what we wanted to happen? Of course, that also assumes that we even knew what we wanted when we made the choice, which most of the time, many of us don't. We also evaluate based on how we feel about the decision in hindsight. This is subject to a lot of biases as we protect our ego. If we got the outcome we desired, even for the wrong reasons, we'll convince ourselves that we were right and not lucky. If, on the other hand, we got an unfortunate outcome, the tendency is to convince ourselves that we did all we could and couldn't have seen it coming. Let's break these 2 false indicators down. Say you had a very thoughtful and intentional process about your career. You had offers from a few different companies, one being a startup and another being a Fortune 500. Based on where you were in your life, you decided to go with the Fortune 500. But the pay was less upfront, but it was more stable. Was your decision good or bad? Now imagine your friend ended up working for the startup. You watched as they got raises and more vacation time. Was your decision good or bad? Now imagine the startup quickly folds after only a year. Was your decision good or bad? You get where I'm going with this. You couldn't control whether the startup took off or not, nor could you control in the moment how you felt about the startup offering higher pay at the time. You could only control the process you used to make the decision. We all want good outcomes, and while we tend to equate good leaders to good outcomes and bad leaders to bad outcomes, we know it's messier than that. As we've seen, good decisions can have bad outcomes, just as bad decisions can have good ones. The real world is complicated. Things don't always work out the way we want them to. Evaluating our own or others' decisions based on the immediate outcome or how we feel about the immediate outcome doesn't go deep enough and doesn't help us get better. If you've ever ruminated on how did I not see that coming, or where did I go wrong for longer than was useful, you've experienced how challenging and ultimately useless it is to judge ourselves on how we feel about the decision in retrospect. We think if only I'd talked to that person who I didn't know at the time, or if only I had known that piece of information that didn't exist, I would have made the right choice. But the masters of decision making don't look at one individual outcome. They zoom out, determine what was within their control, and add what they've learned to their decision making process for next time. They know that if they invest in it, that process will lead to good outcomes more often than not. So what makes for a good decision? A good process used intentionally. And that's exactly what this program is focused on. Each skill you've learned is part of a process that you can take and use no matter what decision you're making. There are 12 essential skills you need to master to have a good decision-making process. And we've covered them all in this course, the 12 skills of good decision-making. Identify the type of decision. Define the root of problem for yourself. Decide at the right time. Identify the most important thing. Own the framing of options. Think of the consequences. Get the best information. Follow your automatic behaviors. Prepare for multiple possible futures. Avoid stupidity. Earn the confidence to act, and learn regardless of the outcome. Throughout this program, you've learned our methods for mastering each of these skills. The actual behaviors and routines, these are the foundations of a great decision, no matter what the outcome is. Looking back at the 2 decisions you made before the program, let's evaluate them based on the skills you've now learned. First and foremost, did you have a process and use it? Did you have something in place proactively so that when a problem or decision arose, you knew what to do? Did you know what type of decision you were making? Moving forward, you'll have this worksheet and this course. No matter which stage you're in, when you encounter a problem, you can use each skill as a checklist to make sure you've covered your bases before deciding. Secondly, did you look upstream to make sure you were solving the root problem? Did you separate defining the problem from trying to find a solution? Remember, this means you didn't let others define the problem for you, and you separated defining the problem from finding a solution. Next, before looking at solutions, did you define your objectives? Did you know the most important thing to you? Now, many of the rest of these may not have come in a particular order, but they're skills sandwiched between solving the right problem and knowing your objectives and learning regardless of the outcomes. Did you know in advance how long you would take to decide? In this course, we learned ASAP or ALAP decisions, but maybe you had another way of determining an amount of time to give a decision in advance. Or did you find yourself in the messy middle, making a decision just to stop thinking about it? Did you do the work to get a credible third option? Did you let others frame that option for you? And did you see how each option would play out over time? Did you look for second and third order consequences? Did you anticipate the amount of work the good outcome would take and anticipate the barriers you'd need to overcome and arrive there? When you were gathering information, was it from your own direct experience and reflection, or the direct experience and reflection of someone else? Or was it tertiary information that could have been filtered? And did you have automatic correct behaviors in place to leverage your best thinking before you needed it? Did you have a plan for how to react based on different outcomes? Did you create a margin of safety so that you were prepared in the widest range of outcomes? Did you position yourself for multiple possible futures? Did you sleep on it first? And when it came to executing, were you away from environmental traps like deciding as a group? When you were rushed, when you were physically or mentally under-resourced, or when you were distracted? When setting the wheels in motion, whether that was sending an email, saying the words aloud that eliminated options and started your team executing, or taking action in another way, did you use positive self-talk? And finally, before this very moment, did you look back and evaluate your decision, reflect upon what went well and what still needs work, and whether or not you're headed towards your objectives? Did you reflect on your experiences and digest it into learning? And did you incorporate that feedback and add it to your process somehow? When you're all done these things, you can sleep soundly knowing you've put yourself on the path to success. If you haven't done these things, even if the outcomes have been good, you may have just gotten lucky. And we want to be strategic, not just lucky. Pause now to take out the checklist. Think through the 2 decisions you listed earlier as being hard decisions and reevaluate them using the new criteria that you learned throughout the course. When you evaluate yourself on these new indicators, how would you rate your decision on a score of 1 to 10 from bad to good? How does that compare to the score you gave yourself earlier? Is your score different than when you don't evaluate yourself on immediate outcomes, but on process? Congratulations on completing a decision performance analysis. This may have been the very first time you've reviewed one of your decisions. Doing this one thing alone is a tremendous skill that's going to create better and better outcomes over time. You've just done what the masters do: perform, record, and evaluate. We want to encourage you to keep doing it. That's why we have included the decision checklist in your resources. Using a decision journal over time is how self-evaluation goes from being interesting to being powerful. You'll be able to look at 2 or 5 or 10 decisions and notice patterns. What's the same about how you handled each? When you look across the span of months or years, you'll see patterns. You'll see where you consistently implement skills and do it well, and you'll learn where you need more work. This is how you'll master the skills of decision making. And this reflection will also help you move beyond evaluating your decisions as good or bad based on the immediate outcomes or your feelings in hindsight, and instead help you focus on what's inside of your control. Developing your skills, developing a process that works for you, and learning from all of your outcomes. If you do this, no matter what the results are of any single decision, I guarantee that you'll have improved your outcomes over time. So I'd like you to pause now and schedule a time to review the decision you've been working on throughout this course. That could be in 3 weeks or 3 months or 3 years, depending on the time span of the decision. Schedule a time to reflect. You'll want to reflect on the process you implemented for your specific decision, what went wrong, what went right, and if there's anything you can do now to improve this situation. You'll also want to reflect on your decision experience, what you learned, and where you might need to calibrate your decision-making ability. With that, you've just finished Decision by Design, but the work is just starting. You've learned the repeatable skills that I've seen work time and time again to produce results and improve performance. You've put yourself on the path to success. This program can be used throughout your life, and it's worth putting into practice as you make a few decisions before you go through the course again. Thanks for dedicating the time to become a better decision maker. I'm delighted to have had the opportunity to share what I've learned and hope utilizing these skills brings a renewed sense of confidence and clarity to your decisions. Welcome back. At the end of this video, we've got a specific list of questions you can ask to ensure every decision you make turns into more opportunities and not more problems. But before we get to the list, let's talk about why second-order thinking is important. Sometimes the paths that are hardest at the beginning have disproportionate rewards later on. As more than a few of my friends have noted, hard decisions make for an easy life. Easy decisions make for a hard life. Often we miss opportunities when we don't ask the question, and then what might happen? And we often miss inevitable problems when we don't ask, what are the potential consequences? As part of our decision-making process, let's zoom out and look at how our opportunities might meet our objectives, not just in the short term, but in the long term as well. We want to make sure the best we can that the choice we make is worth the inevitable consequences it will create, and that the problems in front of us later are better, not worse, than the ones we're facing now. This exercise is best demonstrated with an example. So let's use something we hear about often, deciding which career path to take. We'll show you how we would go about mapping opportunities for someone, and then you can apply this same practice to your own decision. While you grab something to write with, I'll set up a scenario for us to practice with. Sticky notes work great if you have them, but a whiteboard or a sheet of paper will do just fine. Here's the scenario. A client of mine, we'll call her Maria, is mostly self-taught data scientist. She's worked her way up in the startup world and become a reasonably successful executive for 5 years at a tech company. Her position disappeared overnight when the CEO at her company made some poor choices and the company went under. Her goals are to continue earning an executive salary, continue working from home, and ideally work for a company that's more focused on social responsibility. She's got about 2 years of savings and a few job offers for less money than she wants to make, but none that excite her. She's considered going back to school for her master's in hopes that it will open up more employment options. While we work through Maria's opportunities, I'd like you to follow along and do this with your own decision. First, if your objectives didn't include quantities when you wrote them out, make sure they include your quantitative limitations, budget, time, etc. For Maria, her limitations are her budget. She has $100,000 in the bank. Her objectives are to get back to making $150K per year, ideally within 2 years, but she can wait up to 4. Work for a company that's got a track record of being socially responsible. Work from home, and have a work schedule that allows her to be present with her family. Now write down each possible option or path you could take with your decision. We prefer one path per sticky note. For Maria, her options could include going back to school, accepting one of the full-time positions at $90,000 per year, doing some consulting work, continuing to look for other full-time opportunities, doing some combination of the above, or doing nothing. For each possible option, first, look at the immediate short-term results, whatever the short-term means for this decision. For Maria, her short-term results could be, if she goes back to school, that could mean 30+ hours a week would go to school, which means less time to dedicate to paid work or to her family. If she accepts one of the full-time positions she's been offered, she would make money and be able to pay her bills. She could tighten up her budget and save more, and she knows she wouldn't be able to do both a full-time position and schoolwork. If she looks at consulting work, there's a lot of unknowns. She doesn't have enough information to know how much demand there is for the services she could provide or how much she could earn. If she keeps looking for full-time opportunities, she might lose the 2 job offers she has now if she doesn't get back to them in time. Next, think in the long term. Go through Maria's options again, and let's try to answer the question, what will the problem be then? Both in terms of everything going really well and really poorly. If she goes back to school and it goes well, she gets scholarships, develops a great network, and gains skills people want. Then she opens up a lot of opportunities for herself. What will the problem be then? How to turn these skills into a role she wants and that pays well. And if it goes poorly, she takes on debt. She doesn't learn skills people are hiring for. What will the problem be then? How to pay her bills on top of debt when there are no jobs that she's now qualified for. To find out if going back to school is a good decision, she now knows which information she needs to gather. If she can get a scholarship or not, how well the school is networked into the private sector, if people are hiring for the skills she'll develop and for what amount, if she can do schooling in addition to paid work, how long it will take her to make $150K a year with the new skills she'll have. Having that information will help her decide if going back to school is going to move her closer to the most important thing, getting back to $150,000 a year salary within 2 years. If she accepts a full-time position she's not excited about, if it goes well, she makes less than she wants, but there's room to grow at the company. What will the problem be then? How to fulfill the parts of herself that care about social responsibility outside of work, or transition to another company that's more socially responsible when a role becomes available. How to make up the wage gap and retire when she wants to. How to actually move up in the company. And if it goes poorly, she's in another job that she's not passionate about, making less than she wants to. What will the problem be then? She's where she's at now, but with income coming in. Now she knows the information she needs to gather. What are the chances of moving up in the company? What are the chances she'll like her job? What experience will the company give her that will allow her to move on if she wants to? Can she go back to schooling or do some consulting while she's doing this job? What about if she does consulting work? If it goes well, it could lead to her own business and increased flexibility. What's the problem then? How to scale a business? If it goes poorly, if no one wants to do the consulting with her, perhaps she loses job offers. What's the problem then? She's in the same position with less runway. She has less time to accept an offer. Now the information she needs to gather is, are people willing to pay her for her current knowledge and skills? And if so, how much? Now, for the opportunities you're considering, write out the second-order consequences of each choice, including what the new problem will be. Remember, identify the results of both a positive and negative outcome for each choice, exactly like we did with Maria. You'll see that for most decisions, you won't need a technical system, a flowchart, or a computer program to evaluate which opportunity fulfills most of your objectives. A few sticky notes or a piece of paper will do. In fact, the more you need that stuff, the more you tend to get lost in an irrelevant sea of details. Some decisions that have hard numbers attached to them and are large and irreversible require more rigor, like where to invest money or how to retire by a certain age. For these kinds of decisions, second-order thinking is invaluable as it provides a simple framework to work through the potential consequences. Here's what's great about using backcasting from a positive and a negative future and thinking about second-order consequences to map your opportunities in time. You learn exactly what information you need to gather in order to choose a path. You turn amorphous goals into actionable steps. You learn the worst-case scenarios so you can avoid them. And when you know the worst case scenario, you can plan on how to protect yourself from it. Maybe for some decisions at this point, the best opportunities will be clear. You know everything you need to know already in order to rank which of these paths most meets your objectives based on your current knowledge alone. But for most decisions, all we've uncovered is how little we truly know about the decision at hand. When you continue to ask, and then what, and branch off the possible positive consequences and negative consequences for each option, you'll reach a point where you don't have enough information. This is an excellent place to be. Why? Because it's an action. You aren't spinning out or stressing, you know exactly what you need to do. Masters of decision-making know exactly what to test, experiment with, and gather more information on in order to narrow down their options and commit to one path. When most of us think about deciding, we often revert to assuming our solution is a choice between two options, this job or that job, buy the BMW or the Audi, have children or don't, get married or don't, stay or leave. They are framed as whether or not, or do this or do that decisions. In other words, we often act as if our choices are binary, having to choose between only one of two options. And when the problem gets framed by binary thinking because we assume those are the only two options, we miss out on the opportunities for more creative solutions. In the practice scenario, I framed the problem as this job or that job. And it's true that many personal decisions revert to binary thinking, but this type of thinking happens in the workplace too. Do we launch this product or no? Do we do this operation or not? Many decisions seem like a choice between this or that, but the reality is there's almost always another way. Forcing yourself to find at least one more option will not only make you feel better, but will improve your outcomes. I came across a poignant example of this in the book Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. They recount a study where a German technology firm kept a detailed track record of decisions they had made over an 18-month period. The executive board had debated and resolved 83 major decisions during that time. 95% of the decisions only involved two options. 5% of the decisions involved three options, and there were never more than three options. But years later, when the same executive board ranked those decisions, that small 5% of decisions that had three options, well, 40% of them were evaluated as having very good outcomes. The other 95% of decisions where the options were binary, the executives only ranked 6% of the outcomes as very good. 6%! Getting out of the binary by including just one more option gave them a 600% higher chance of making what they felt like was a good decision in retrospect. In the workplace, decisions are often framed by others as binary choices. Do we develop this business line or not? In our personal lives, we also frame things as binary choices. Do we marry this person or not? This type of framing is as comfortable and natural as it is passive. Doing the work to add a third option forces us to get creative and really dig into the problem. Giving ourselves more choices increases the chances that we will be happier with our decision down the road, even if we don't choose the third option. Forcing ourselves to dive into the problem and come up with a credible third option helps us to understand the problem better and get clear on the most important thing and own the framing. Whether consciously or not, other people's view of a problem can trap us into only seeing their solutions. Remember, one of the biggest mistakes that we make as leaders and decision makers is letting other people frame the problem for us. But another mistake, and this one is more nuanced, is how we frame the solutions after we agree on the problem. For example, if I give you a chessboard and suggest you move your queen forward or back, you start to see the board only through the lens of the queen and miss that your knight could win the game with a checkmate. But when we consciously create options, we're no longer accepting just what's presented to us, and we're doing the work to see the whole board. Just as we don't want someone else's view of a problem to limit the solutions we consider, we don't want their view of the solutions to limit the options available to solve the problem. Getting creative about options gives us more opportunities to align our decisions with our goals, better understand the problem, and gives us optionality in the future. Let's look at 3 ways my friends Chip and Dan Heath used to get us out of binary thinking: vanishing options, this and that, and opportunity cost. And we'll explore these together. Technique 1, vanishing options. Ask yourself if one of the options you're considering was gone, completely off the table. What would you do? For example, perhaps you're considering whether or not to stay at a job where you don't get along with your coworker. Your binary here is to stay or leave. Now I want you to practice eliminating the option of leaving. Imagine for some reason there's absolutely no way to quit your job. You must stay. What could you do to make going to work every day more enjoyable? What could you do to stay in your job and still move closer to your objectives? What could you do to stay and give yourself more options in the future so you're not stuck feeling powerless? Pause the video for a second and consider what having to stay might look like. If you have to stay, maybe that means having a hard conversation with your boss and your coworker that you haven't had yet. Maybe that means putting in a transfer to another department, and maybe that's asking your boss if you can work remotely. Now flip this situation around. Try eliminating the other option you were considering. Eliminate staying at your job. Now you have to leave. Imagine you're being laid off at the end of the month. What would you do? Pause the video and think about it for 30 seconds. Would you call up old clients and see if they need help? Would you get a hold of people in your network and see if they can make an introduction at their company? Here's why I love this technique. Sometimes circumstances don't allow us to do exactly what we want to do, but that doesn't mean we can't still move forward by creating multiple options and therefore getting closer to our goals. Technique 2, this and that options. When we think in this or that about our choices, we neglect to see how our solutions can work together. So another technique for getting out of binary thinking is this and that options. One area where we tend to be pretty good at combining solutions is vacations. We ask everybody what they want to do and then try to find a place that does it all. This is why resorts or cruises offer a long list of activities. The more variety, the more attractive they are to groups with different interests. So we rarely have to choose between the beach or the pool. We can have both. In your career, can you stay and update your resume and begin to reach out to your network? Can you apply for jobs? Can you go to school in the evenings to acquire a new skill? Can you start a creative project or side business? Can you do anything in addition to your job that will give you the outlet you need and improve your capabilities and engagement at work? Our personal lives also benefit from this and that thinking. So often we expect our partners to fulfill 100% of our emotional needs. That's a lot to ask of anyone, and most of us experience relationship challenges because of the inevitable disappointments. But instead of asking, should I stay with them anyway or leave, ask yourself instead, is there anyone else that could meet any of your emotional needs that your partner can't? Do I have a colleague that I could talk to about work if I need to? Do I have a friend who shares an interest or who will take a class with me? When we think of adding people to our lives, we start to open up this and that options for ways to meet our emotional needs. So instead of it being binary of should I leave my partner or stay with them, we start to say, okay, this is what they can really do well. Now who else can I include in my life to help me with the rest? This person and that person. So when you're considering should I do this or that, change up your thinking and move toward how you can do this and that. Technique 3, explore the opportunity cost. When we decide to buy something and have to choose amongst options like purchasing a car, we often make a mental list of what we like and dislike, and we imagine which one will bring us the most joy. The Tesla will look extra cool and be fuel efficient, but will it be good for road trips? A BMW looks great and has more cargo space, but it's behind the curve and it's gas powered. Should I get this car that's $42,000 or this car that's $37,000? Unfortunately, we're terrible predictors of what actually brings us joy and satisfaction. We focus solely on what we are gaining and forget to factor in what we're giving up when we make a choice. We forget to explore the opportunity cost. How does the choice between two cars change if you factor in what you're giving up if you buy the more expensive one? If you buy the Tesla, it's going to cost you $5,000 more than the BMW. So what are you not going to do with that $5,000? Are you giving up a family vacation or the dividends that money will earn after 20 years in the stock market? And money is not the only resource to consider in terms of opportunity cost. Here's another scenario. Your family is growing and it's time to move. Going out of the city a bit will get you a bigger house with a bigger yard, more space for the kids, and it's actually cheaper than buying a smaller semi-downtown with a postage stamp sized backyard and a small third bedroom. In this situation, you need to evaluate the opportunity cost of not only money, but time. The house in the suburbs will change your commute each way from a predictable half hour to an unpredictable hour and a half. What are you not going to get done because you're spending an extra 2 hours a day in transit? Will you spend less time with your kids and your partner? What do you think you might miss out on with them? Will you be able to spend the commute learning a new language or reading some great literature, or will you have to deal with frustration and stress of driving? Over time, which option is better for your mental and physical health? You need to consider more than the joy and satisfaction of stepping out into your new big house for the first time. You need to consider how the day-to-day experience of living in the suburbs is going to cost you. Exploring the opportunity cost is particularly useful when deciding between a narrow set of options. We can ask ourselves what the cost of each option is, what we're giving up by choosing it, and use that insight to determine which one is the best in terms of using the resources to move closer to our goals. Finally, there's a fourth technique that great decision makers I know use all the time, and this one is dead simple and strikingly effective. Gather more information. Remember, the source of all bad decisions is something you didn't know at the time you made the decision. So if you don't have to make the decision now, don't. If you have an inclination as to which choice you'd make, ask yourself what information would change your mind. If you don't have an inclination as to which choice you're leaning towards, ask yourself what information would help you decide. Through the process of gathering more information, other options tend to present themselves. While holding your ground and observing isn't sexy, it's very effective. We don't need a lot of additional options, just a few really good ones. When you hear yourself say whether or not, it means you're entering a narrow pathway between a rock and a hard place, a binary decision. If you find yourself in this position often, developing the skill is an exciting opportunity for you. When you add an extra option, you not only tend to be more satisfied with your choices, but you understand the problem better, get clear on what matters, and switch from passive thinking to owning the frame. Diving in and forcing yourself to add a credible option allows you to see combinations of choices that are possible, revealing solutions you may not have considered before. Instead of, should I quit my job? The decision becomes, what's the best place to invest my career to reach my goals? Then the options go beyond stay or leave. Now there's also stay at this company, apply for other jobs, and see what opportunities are out there and start building clientele on evenings and weekends. Better questions get you better answers. This is why, if you're the decision maker, you need to own the frame. That means never allowing others to define the problem for you, but it also means never being limited by the options presented. Let's wrap up by revisiting the scenario from the beginning. Again, you're a junior lawyer moving to Philly to be with your partner. You've been looking for work for over 6 months, and after 4 visits to Philly, you've been offered 2 positions. In order, your objectives are to be closer to your partner, make sure you can pay the bills and be financially stable, get your foot in the door doing patent law, and eventually open your own firm. You're presented with 2 offers currently, a law clerk at Belvini & Associates, which specializes in patent law, and a junior attorney position at Robinson & Walker that specializes in immigration law. Now, when I ask you which one you'd choose, I want you to respond with your new knowledge about breaking out of binary choices. Instead of responding which option you'd choose, create 2 to 3 additional options instead. Then examine your own decision and break out of the binary. Remember, owning the decision means you own the framing of both the problem and the solutions. Dig deeper and do the work to find better options. Imagine standing near the top of Mount Everest, just 50 meters from reaching the very top. Your entire body is aching, your mind is numb. It feels like no matter how hard you breathe, there's just not enough oxygen. And you've been training for this moment for years. You've spent $60,000 on guides and getting here. You've sacrificed time with your family and friends. You've arranged months off of work. You've told everyone today is the day you'd make the big attempt. Everything you've worked for is right in front of you, and you can see the goal and you're nearly there. But you're 30 minutes behind schedule and your oxygen is running low. Do you turn around or do you push forward? The world's best Sherpas know the most dangerous part of summiting Mount Everest isn't reaching the peak, it's the descent. It's not getting there, it's getting back. So much focus is spent on getting to the top that even if climbers are running out of energy or oxygen, they keep pushing themselves to the summit. They're lost in summit fever, and they forget the most important thing isn't making it to the top, but rather making it home. You can't win if you don't survive. For those of us outside of this situation, sitting in the comfort of our own home, likely with no plans to climb Mount Everest, the idea of summit fever seems a bit ridiculous. Reaching the summit isn't worth someone's life. But for those standing on the top of the mountain, turning their backs on a dream that's so close they can see it is much harder. Not only do the incredible amounts of energy spent climbing the mountain affect your body, but the stress of your cognitive ability as well. High-stress situations negate your careful planning and often compromise your ability to reach your true objectives. Climbing Everest is a dramatic example of why it's critical to leverage our thinking when we're at our best. Our chances of success increase when we create automatic behaviors to decide how our future selves are going to respond when things get hard or go off track. When you try to decide at the moment the situation changes and you most need to think, you will not put yourself on the path to success. Instead, you need to leverage your best thinking and make decisions in advance. Ed Viesturs is a renowned American climber. On one of his first attempts at Everest, he was only 100 meters away from the summit when the weather conditions changed. In a Times article from March of 2016, he said the reason that he's gone to the summit 7 times and be the only American to climb all 14 of the world's tallest peaks was because he was willing to walk away when he needed to. Ed is like all of the best climbers and trip leaders on Everest. They decide in advance when they'll turn around on the mountain. They know how long they have, and if they don't make it to the summit by that time, or if the weather changes, even if they're only 100 meters away, they have to turn back to survive. We can apply the same thinking in our lives even if we're not climbing mountains. Instead of using our energy when it's hardest to come by, like trying to coordinate our team when the worst has happened, we can leverage our best thinking and decide in advance. This is a technique I see used all the time by people I consider exceptional decision makers. They make automatic rules so they don't have to make decisions. Not only do correct automatic behaviors help us avoid poor decision making, they can also help us feel calmer and clearer when we're waiting as long as possible to decide on our consequential decisions. When you know in advance, if this certain event happens, here's how I'll respond, you no longer have to ruminate on the decision in a stressful situation. You can spend your energy elsewhere. Throughout this course, you've already been developing correct automatic behaviors. You've already been thinking while you're at your best to determine what to do when you might not be at your best. For example, deciding to wait as long as possible to decide if the decision is irreversible and consequential is an automatic behavior. Taking action once you've started losing opportunities is an automatic behavior. Having a decision-making process at all is an automatic behavior. So you've already started developing this skill. Now it's time to apply it to the decision at hand. There's a process that utilizes 3 complementary techniques which you can use to create automatic behaviors that you can rely on when unexpected stressors arise. Tripwires, empowering others to make decisions, and tying your hands. Let's explore these. The first technique I want to talk about is setting tripwires. A tripwire is deciding in advance to take a course of action when you hit a specific quantifiable time amount or circumstance. For teams climbing Everest, their tripwires could be at a certain pace that isn't met, or a certain geographical location that isn't reached in a certain amount of time. If the team hits on one of them, there's no arguing on the mountain, there's no deciding when they're tired. They've already decided, they all know in advance, it's time to turn around. When we covered backcasting from future decisions, we got clear on what the signposts are that we're headed towards our positive future or our negative future. We've done the work up front to identify the signs we're on the right path as well as the wrong path. Now we need to know what to do when certain things happen and we aren't in a position to be our most thoughtful, insightful selves. While you're in a great frame of mind with the time and space to think clearly, let's commit to what you'll do when you see negative signs, the absence of positive signs, and positive signs. It's easy to see why we'd want a tripwire for negative signs. There are flags that something is going seriously off course. When you're thinking about your negative signs, remember, they are likely to be serious, unexpected situations that cause you significant stress of some sort. But we're not going to stop there. We're also going to include the absence of positive signs, meaning things haven't gone wrong, but they haven't exactly gone as expected either. This is where most projects fail and decisions get challenging. When we fall in the middle, if you don't see positive signs you're moving closer to your goals, it's time to reevaluate. Is the most important thing still the most important thing? Were you wrong? What will it take to reach your goals now that you're closer in time but not closer in progress? Do you still have the right information? Are you having to navigate unexpected consequences? I want you to plan a tripwire response for the lack of positive signs. What are some indicators that you need to reevaluate your decision? Finally, positive signs. If you hit positive tripwires, you can invest more confidently because you have proof that things are going well. It might be time to put the pedal to the metal. A lot of your positive tripwires are likely to be parts of the path to success you identified in the backcasting exercise. Let's walk through an example together, and then you can apply this technique on your own to your decision. When we decided to start a YouTube channel of clips of our podcast content, I identified some of the measurable goals. I then came up with tripwires so that my decisions wouldn't be skewed by emotional attachment to the content, sunk costs, or a few really harsh reviews. I started with 2 goals: having a certain number of subscribers within a year and receiving feedback that the content was helping people. As I went through the tripwire identification process, here's what I wrote down. Negative signs our YouTube efforts weren't working. 1. A low amount of subscribers. 2. A critical mass of terrible reviews. 3. Watch time, which is the percent of a video the average person watches. So my tripwires for these situations were, if we don't have X subscribers within 3 months, we stop. If our ratio of good reviews to bad reviews is anything lower than 3-to-1, we stop. If people don't watch 30 to 40% of the videos that we post, we stop. I applied the same parameters to considering the absence of positive signs. Gaining subscribers sporadically with lots of churn. No bad reviews, but no really good reviews either. My tripwires for these scenarios were, if our churn rate's over 20%, reevaluate our content. If we don't have X good reviews within 3 months, reevaluate our content. Watch time of 15 to 20%. Finally, I outlined the signs of my best case scenario, 50,000 subscribers in 1 year. I picked an optimistic but achievable amount. Here were the tripwires I used to flag when we could up our investment in the channel. 20,000 subscribers in 3 months, on track to hit the year target. 100 great reviews in the first 3 months, demonstrating our content is resonating with viewers. For me, setting tripwires is invaluable because we all face moments in our decision-making that cloud our judgment. Tripwires help us stay on track to attain our most important goals. Now it's your turn. Keep in mind while doing this exercise that a tripwire doesn't always mean that you have to take action when you hit these points. It could mean that you need to revisit your objectives and your goals, or just check in. Pause the video now and decide what you'll do if you see negative signs, a lack of positive signs, and positive signs, and what the tripwire for each of those is in your decision. The second technique for establishing correct automatic behaviors is to empower others to act. Great leaders know things often don't go according to plan. They also know they can't be everywhere at once. Teams need to know how to adapt when circumstances change. What if they lose their leader or encounter an unexpected obstacle? Giving a team enough structure to successfully carry out a mission, but enough flexibility to respond to changing circumstances is referred to as commander's intent. A military term first applied to the Germans who were trying to defeat Napoleon. It has 4 components: formulate, communicate, interpret, and implement. The first 2, formulate and communicate, are the responsibility of the senior commander. You have to communicate to your team the strategy and rationale, not just the what and the why, but how you arrived at your decision so they can understand the context and the operational limits. What is completely off the table? Subordinate commanders then have the tools to interpret changing context to try to implement the strategy. Continuous feedback is important, and so is recognizing the individual capabilities of your subordinates. Commander's intent empowers each person on a team to initiate and improvise as they're executing the plan. It stops you from being the bottleneck, and it allows the team to keep each other accountable to the goal without you present. If you've been on the inside of a business where employees can't take action until everything is approved by the boss, you're seeing what happens when there isn't a commander's intent. If something happens to that CEO, the business and mission fail. So ask yourself now, who needs to know your goals and the outcomes you're working towards? Do they know clearly what the most important objective is? Do they know what tripwires are in place and what will occur if those tripwires are met? The team should know all the objectives, tripwires, and limits before you begin executing on a decision, so there's no confusion as you move forward. One of the signs that you failed to empower your team to work towards your goals is if you can't be away from the office for a week. You shouldn't have to be available 24/7 for decisions to be made and objectives to be achieved. If you can't be away, it doesn't mean you're indispensable, it means you're a poor communicator. Another flag that indicates you aren't confident in your ability to give your team the right framework for executing tasks and making decisions is if you insist on controlling the how of everything. Good leaders set the what and the parameters to get there. They don't care if something is done differently than how they would have done it themselves. As long as it respects the limits and advances the objective, they are satisfied. Poor leaders insist that everything must be done their way, which ultimately demoralizes their team and undermines both loyalty and creativity, the exact opposite of commander's intent. Finally, we can make sure we execute our correct automatic behaviors by tying our hands so it's as easy as possible to carry out our decision. Let me explain what I mean. There's this excellent Greek fable told in two of my favorite decision-making books, both in Judgment and Managerial Decision-Making and in Thinking in Bets. It's the Greek myth of Ulysses. Ulysses was the captain of a ship. There was an island and they were going to pass where the sirens would sing the most beautiful song in the world. The problem was that the song was so beautiful it would drive the crew mad and they would run the boat ashore trying to reach the island. Ulysses wanted to hear the sirens singing, but without risking his life or the crew's life. Now, if the goal is to make great decisions, Ulysses didn't really think through the consequences, but that's not the part I love. Instead, what I love is in order to leverage good decision-making while sane, he devised a plan so the crew would steer the ship towards the island, but they would have wax cotton in their ears so they couldn't hear the siren's song. They would only get so close and then turn around. And to prevent them from changing plan, Ulysses would have his crew tie him to the mast so that no matter how mad he was driven by the siren song, he couldn't influence the crew or change the decision he had already made. In the fable, Ulysses' clever implementation of the correct automatic behavior allowed him to both hear the sirens and make sure the crew survived the ordeal. He used commander's intent and tripwires, and he leveraged his brain while it was at least halfway working to prevent him from making poor choices when it didn't work at all. That's why leveraging your decision-making power in this way is called the Ulysses Pact. It's tying your hands to the mast to follow through with the behavior you want to implement. In dieting, that might mean throwing out all the junk food so you don't have any in the house to resist. In investing, that might mean creating automated deposits each month. When we practice deciding backwards, we get clear on the actions we need to take to reach our outcomes. Ulysses pacts are a great way of deciding in advance how we can fulfill these actions without extra energy in the future. So think now, is there any way to figuratively tie your hand to the mast for the decisions you want to implement? In the example of climbing Everest, a Ulysses pact could be the arrangement from everyone in advance to turn around if they weren't at the halfway point at a certain time. For your decision, is there a way to make sure you stick to the path once you've committed to it, once you know it's the correct choice? By thinking through our options and not just planning, but committing to courses of action, we free up space to tackle other problems. Even if we're waiting as long as possible to decide, we now know exactly what to focus on and do when the time comes to make our decision. We've set out our tripwires, we've empowered our people to act on them, and we've tied our hands so that we can't undo all of our good work in a moment of stress. All that's left is to make sure we're prepared for the widest range of outcomes so we can move forward confidently even when it's risky. If you're an investor, you've likely heard the story of long-term capital management. Long-term capital management was a hedge fund founded in 1994 by a prominent investor who managed to get a Nobel laureate in economics on his board. In the beginning, they were highly acclaimed for their incredible returns. They had a high-risk portfolio that paid off, at least in the beginning. Long-term capital management had an annualized return of over 21% in its first year, and 43% in the second year, and 41% in the third year. I want you to take a second and imagine being an investor in this environment. You see this hedge fund taking off, and maybe your friends are elbowing you, boasting of their success and saying, "You've got to invest in this." You watch them double, then quadruple their investments, and it's natural to wonder if you should invest everything as well. Imagine looking at your own portfolio and your returns year over year are 8% to 12%. These are good returns, but they aren't 40%. Is the rest of the world going to get rich while you play it safe? If you've been trying to predict the future based on what little you know of the present, it would have been easy to think, gosh, I should reinvest everything in this hedge fund. I'd be getting such higher returns. We make predictions like that because we assume tomorrow will be like today. If we invested heavily in the hedge fund, it was because we assumed that the fourth year would look like the first 3 years. But tomorrow is never like today. And in that fourth year, long-term capital management's plan stopped working. In 1998, both Asia and Russia had a financial crisis. Between the crisis and their high leverage investing, long-term capital management lost $4.6 billion in less than 4 months. Here's what that looks like if you had invested $1,000 from the beginning in 1994. Isn't that shocking? People who invested everything in this hedge fund were in financial ruin. If you're planning for a future that depends on things being the same as they are today, you're going to be sideswiped when things inevitably change. You will lose whether it's money, security, autonomy, or peace of mind if you don't expect the future to contain some calamity. You risk losing everything you have. Now imagine it's November 1st, 1997. You just hit the peak of returns at long-term capital management. If you anticipate the future is going to be different than the present, how would your investment strategy change? You probably wouldn't assume astronomical losses and might invest a little. But if you were one of the smart ones, you prepared 1998 to be different by only investing maybe 1/10 of your portfolio in their hedge fund. In 1998, you wouldn't be happy about losing 10% of your investments, but you wouldn't be so badly hurt by it either. See, we can prepare for a variety of extreme outcomes by first anticipating that they will actually happen. On a macro level, we can guarantee that we'll experience war and political dissent, natural disasters, environmental and ecological change, economic fluctuations, both collapse and growth, technological advances and resistance to them. And on a personal level, we can guarantee we'll experience grief from losing a loved one, health issues, relationship changes, financial pressures, challenges in meeting our career goals. Accepting that there will be downs in life as well as ups helps increase the possibility of good outcomes to our decisions. When we look at the future and actively plan for bad things to happen, we'll be more resilient no matter what comes to pass. When the market tanks or our supply chains get threatened or our partner gets sick or we get a terrible new boss, we want options. We want to be able to choose to switch jobs or take time off to care for our partner or buy the product we need from a different country or to invest in new opportunities. We want to be able to respond positively to the changes by having options to organize our lives differently. In order to preserve as much optionality as you can, you need to prepare for the worst. You need to actively imagine the worst case scenario and ask yourself what you need to be able to deal with it. And then you start building those capabilities into your life now. When you prepare in advance, you build a margin of safety. Building a margin of safety means giving yourself as much cushioning and coverage in the future as possible. Just like shooting bullets before cannonballs, a margin of safety is saying we've covered the widest range of possible future outcomes. Before we dive into how to apply this skill, I want to be clear that I understand you can't prepare for everything. Some horrific events defy imagination, and other events are just tragic, and no amount of preparation can ever give you enough optionality to deal with them. This skill is about preparing for extreme possible outcomes while recognizing that many serious events have an emotional component that you can't process in advance. Now, what do you need to do to build a margin of safety? Let's start with a very typical application. Engineers build margins of safety into everything they design and construct. Bridge building is one of the most obvious examples. Let's say we calculate that on an average day, a proposed bridge will be required to support 5,000 tons at any one time. If we build it to withstand 5,001 tons, we have no margin of safety. What if we get a day with much heavier traffic than usual? What if our calculations and estimates are a little off? What if the material weakens over time at a rate faster than we imagined? So to account for all of that, we'd want to build a bridge that can withstand 10,000 or even 20,000 tons. Why? We don't know what the future looks like. We don't know if multiple trucks will ever get stuck on the bridge at the same time. We don't know if trucks in the future will be heavier or lighter. The buffer zone between what we expect to happen and what could happen is the margin of safety. Say you're building a skyscraper and you want to calculate how resistant to earthquakes it should be. How would you go about obtaining that information? Do you look at what the average magnitude of earthquakes was over the past 100 years? Do you plan for it to survive the highest magnitude that that area has ever encountered? Or do you plan it to survive double or even quadruple the highest magnitude that area has ever experienced? And when does investing in the building surviving quadruple the magnitude pay off versus eat so much of your profits that it's not worth it if the earthquake never hits? Keep in mind that as you're preparing for multiple possible futures, that the worst that has happened in history always surprised people at the time. This can't be your baseline. Engineers don't rely on just the historical use of the current bridge. You have to really stretch your imagination to explore and anticipate what could go wrong. We have a simple heuristic for creating a margin of safety so you know when enough is enough most of the time. The margin of safety is sufficient when it can absorb double the worst case scenario. Our baseline is creating a margin of safety that can absorb twice the amount of catastrophe that would cause a crisis, or having twice the amount of resources to rebuild from a crisis. So if you want to feel financially secure, even if you lose your job, you can estimate how long it will take you to gain employment again, and then save enough to live well for double that amount of time. Or if you want to avoid financial ruin, you'd only invest an amount in risky stocks that if you lost double that amount, it wouldn't impact you. So that's our baseline. But then we want to adjust our margin of safety, the more consequential, volatile, or unknown the outcomes are. If you're worried about losing your job and you're in a sector that's volatile or an economy that's volatile, you'll want to increase that length of time you can take to care for yourself while unemployed. If you're investing in something like Bitcoin that has a very short history, so it's probably unpredictable, you'd want to lower the amount that contributes to your portfolio. Finally, you can decrease your margin of safety the less consequential or volatile the outcomes. The longer something exists and performs well, the more stable it is. Coca-Cola isn't going anywhere in the near future, Johnson & Johnson isn't either. And finally, if you have tons of expertise and data, you can further reduce the margin of safety. Let's go through some examples. Warren Buffett aims to buy stocks that are 30 to 50% less than their true value, so he has a 30 to 50% margin of safety on stocks. But he'll play close to a dollar on dollar for stocks that he has an incredible understanding of and that are low in volatility. So there's only maybe a 5% margin of safety on the stocks that he's most confident in. One of Warren Buffett's core tenets for buying a business is that if he doesn't understand it, he doesn't buy it. In other words, if in his mind it's volatile or he simply doesn't understand a business enough to calculate a margin of safety, he doesn't buy stock in it at all. He knows that not all margins of safety will protect him. The goal isn't to get it perfect for every stock he buys, it's to make it the best possible strategy for all the stocks he buys in the big picture. Another example of creating a margin of safety is the manufacturing of airplane wings. The Federal Aviation Administration requires that all planes are able to withstand 150% of the maximum expected load for 4 seconds. So if a plane's wings can survive turbulence for 50% stronger than the worst that's ever been encountered. This is 50% lower than our double rule, but with good reason. Engineers and scientists have hard data on the worst possible turbulences the Earth can produce, and they manufacture planes to withstand significantly more. Both of these are examples in which the decision makers know a lot more about the risks and limitations of those risks. What about when things aren't so clear? I don't know what the future holds, I just want to be prepared for a wide range of outcomes. While interest rates have been low, I know a lot of people who borrow a lot of money to live today. And that might make sense for them, but it doesn't make sense if you think of preparing over predicting. Ask yourself what they're really predicting. They're predicting interest rates stay low. They're predicting the economy stays the same or improves. They're predicting that they can sell their house for more than they paid for it, etc. But they're not only predicting, they're optimizing for the current world, and they don't know it. They're fragile and they don't know it because their choices only make sense if things don't change. And we know things will always change eventually. The thing about optimizing for now is that it always looks like the best course of action until it's not. If on the other hand, you're preparing for a wide range of scenarios, you're always going to look like an idiot in the short term compared to someone who's optimizing for today. But eventually things do change, as they always do. And the people that are optimizing get exposed. As Warren Buffett put it so visually, you only find out who's been swimming naked when the tide goes out. I've always had simple rules around money. When I first started my job in the government, I spent all of my salary on living. I lived well. But as I got raises and promotions, my lifestyle didn't change at all. I saved and invested the difference. This gave me a lot of options that other people didn't have. I could leave my job for years and live off of savings. I could put a down payment on a house. I could invest. I could travel. Another example of how I apply this concept is when planning for renovations. Most of the time you negotiate with a contractor and then assume things will go according to plan. Alas, they never do, so I budget that things will cost 30% more and take 50% more time than expected. And even those preparations have been challenged at times. Now, it's hard to talk about margin of safety without talking about the COVID-19 pandemic. Things could have changed dramatically by the time you're watching this, but some things are very, very clear from the onset. Pandemics are not new. They've happened many times before, and they will happen again. Countries who had recently been reminded that pandemics were possible via the bird flu experienced faster mobilization, at least by the time of this course, because they saw the real possibilities of a pandemic and had spent time planning for potential consequences. The US, under prior administrations, had a department dedicated to understanding these types of pandemics and preparing a response. It operated on the expectation a situation like COVID-19 would arise. The administration under which it did occur, though, had gutted this department and the available response, leaving no margin of safety. The transmission rates within the US and Canada have been wildly different, so far based on the amount of preparation each country did. Using our rule of thumb, we'd want to, at the very minimum for our countries, be prepared to isolate and deploy resources for a virus that had a transmission rate that's double what the worst pandemic transmission rate has previously been. And because the transmission rate of future disease is highly unpredictable, we'd want to prepare for a transmission rate of higher than double what we've previously experienced, if at all possible. The chances of a pandemic happening again are high. The rate of transmission and mortality are the variables we don't know. Over-preparing is never going to be a waste of resources for the government. Margins of safety can even be as simple as increasing the time allotments you allow in your planning. For example, if a contractor tells you they'll be done in a month, plan for it to take 2. If you think it would take you 5 days to mount a response to a crisis, have the resources available to work for 10. Of course, there are unpredictable and chaotic events that will go beyond our margin of safety. Our goal is simply to create a margin of safety that gives us the most optionality in the future most of the time. Each time you increase the risk, the consequences, or the volatility, increase your margin of safety. So the more consequential the decision or the riskier and more unknown the outcomes, the bigger margin of safety you need. Now let's apply this skill to your own decision. Starting with the worst case scenario that we created in our previous lesson on backcasting from the future, let's create a margin of safety. What's the worst case scenario? What would it take in quantifiable resources to avoid the worst case scenario? What would it take in quantifiable resources to rebuild from this worst case scenario? On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the outcomes that are as stable and predictable as the force of gravity or planet growth, and 1, the outcomes being as unpredictable as human emotion, how predictable and stable are the outcomes of the decision you're making? If it's a 1 to 6, increase your margin of safety from double. If it's a 7 to 9, decrease your margin of safety. If it's a 10, decrease your margin of safety, but only after getting an outside opinion. Because when we think something is 100% certain, we're almost always wrong. Once you know what margin of safety you need, building it into your life allows you to move forward confidently with your decision. You know that if the worst case scenario happens, you've not only got tripwires and a plan for what to do about it, you also have wiggle room so you can get back on your feet. All that's left to do is act, assess, and learn. We'll cover how to do that next. Welcome back. I want to start this lesson with one of the most common things I see distracting great decision makers from taking charge and moving intentionally towards their objectives, accepting the problem statement that's handed to them, and then jumping into it and solving it. Think about it. Too often, the first person to define a problem dictates the problem to be solved. And once there's a problem out there on the table, our instinct is to jump in and start solving it right away. But this impatience backfires when we jump to solutions without considering if the problem has been defined properly. How we state the problem dictates the solutions we see. So before we accept a problem, we really need to know if it's the right problem. Organizations and individuals waste a lot of time solving the wrong problems. They go too fast and don't spend enough time getting to the root problem. How we state the problem puts us on the path toward success. And most of the time, the first problem put on the table is not the problem we really need to solve. And it's only natural that top performers are impatient. Once you put a problem in front of them, they immediately go into solution mode. That's because we're taught that having a solution is how we add value. So we get caught up in doing something over doing the right thing. We want to be seen as decisive, action-oriented, and signal that we're doing something. So more often than not, when we jump in right away, we end up solving the wrong problem. This is how we end up putting out fires rather than preventing them. And it's also how we end up being pulled to and fro by other people's agendas or being limited by our framing of the problem rather than setting our own path, intentionally creating optimal solutions. Here's the thing. How we define a problem shapes the solutions we come up with. And if you're the decision maker, you need to think through the problem yourself. Other people, including experts, can give you a starting place, sure, but you need to figure out the root problem for yourself. That's why the very first skills we're covering in this course are about correctly identifying and framing the problem. You dramatically increase your effectiveness of your decisions when you spend time making sure you're solving the right problem. There are 2 ways we can use to increase the odds that we're solving the right problem. The first way is to never accept someone else's definition of the problem. Others might give you a starting point, but you have to do your own work and not jump into solutions. The second way, when it's more team-based, is to put up a firewall between the problem definition and the problem solution. That means you're not having one meeting to decide the problem and brainstorm solutions. And because we're action-oriented, the tendency is to spend 1 to 2 minutes defining the problem and the rest of the meeting solving it. You need to separate the problem definition and the solution into 2 meetings, preferably at least a day apart. That slows people down and allows you to ask people questions, not get caught up in signaling in the heat of the moment, and really allows you to think on the problem. These 2 actions help you delay just enough to make sure you hit the bullseye more often. Here's what that firewall looks like in the context of real life. If you're in a group collecting feedback or have the authority to direct the group, separate the problem and the solution discussions completely. Give the group dedicated time to get clear on exactly what the problem is. Only after you understand the problem and you have thought about it as a team can you start evaluating options. Don't put these 2 things in the same meeting. In your personal decisions, give yourself time to get clear on what the problem is before trying to solve it. You can really only do this if you articulate it either verbally or in writing. Make it concrete. Making it concrete will help you determine if it's actually the problem you want to solve. When someone runs into your office and tells you what the problem is, remember the rule of never allowing other people to define the problem for you and tell them you need to think about it before offering a solution. The best decision makers separate the discussion around identifying the problem and the solutions to address it. They do this not only with teams, but with themselves. They know the first problem with any decision is finding out what the problem truly is. And that's what we're going to do in this lesson. Develop this skill of finding the root problem. Here's what I mean by that. I once took over a department where the software used by the team would regularly freeze and need to be rebooted. Seemingly every weekend, a tech person would have to be dispatched to come in and restart it. This didn't seem like a big deal because 5 minutes later, the system would be back up and running. Then one day I saw the tech guy's bill. There were charges for 6 to 12 hours of overtime every single month. But he was a hero. He was solving the problem. Or was he? I found out that for each of those weekend visits, he'd get paid for 3 hours of overtime. And this had been happening for years. The tech person was fixing the symptom, but the problem still existed. Fixing the software took more work in the short term, a few days instead of 5 minutes. But after it was fixed, the symptom never happened again. The best decision makers make sure when they begin to solve a problem, they're solving the real problem, so that when they decide which solution to pursue, it creates fewer problems and easier decisions in the future. One way to do this is to ask yourself, what would have to be true for this problem not to exist in the first place? Here's a vivid example of this question being put into practice. According to estimates by the ASPCA, one of the largest animal welfare groups in the United States, more than 3 million dogs enter a shelter each year and are put up for adoption. Through the Adopt a Dog programs, roughly 1.4 million dogs are adopted each year. But that leaves more than 1 million unadopted dogs in the US, and that doesn't even account for other animals like cats. There's just only so many people willing to adopt a pet, and there's a limit on how many pets a family can have. We don't have to be an animal lover to recognize the issue here. This applies to businesses just as much as it applies to dog adoption rates. Sometimes a problem seems to simply dwarf the available resources for solving it. Most shelters asked, how can we get more people to adopt? But that question failed to produce meaningful progress towards solving the actual problem. But one shelter did something differently. According to a 2017 Harvard Business Review article, the founder of Downtown Dog Rescue in Los Angeles, Lori Weezy, saw the issue from a different perspective. She looked at the problem and asked, what would have to be true for there to be less dogs to adopt in the first place? And a better, more permanent solution became clear. She dug into the data and found out that 30% of dogs that enter a shelter are owner surrenders. She then learned that a lot of times these pets were surrendered because caring owners simply couldn't afford to feed them. They thought someone else could better care for the animal. So Weezy started a new program in 2013 where whenever a family came in to surrender a pet, the staff would ask, without judgment, if the family would prefer to keep the pet. If they answered yes, then the staff would use their network to help resolve the problem, whether it was a $10 rabies shot or access to food for the pet. They realized that instead of incurring the costs associated with housing a pet, it was actually cheaper to help a family feed and keep the pet in the first place. More importantly, 75% of the families who had come in to surrender their pets with access to resources were able to keep their pets permanently. This is just one possible way to address the root problem of too many dogs in shelters. There are many others, but the rule of looking for the root problem applies in business too. If a company thinks its problem is that it's not getting enough new sales, it may marshal resources to go out and get more new customers. But if they identify that the product is the problem and keeping customers happy is the actual issue at hand, that completely changes the root problem and how it's addressed. You can easily see how the problem changes depending on who you're talking to. While each person has a lens into the problem, it's rarely the actual problem itself. Okay, let's turn this into a skill by practicing and applying it. Let's think about the situation of millions of unadopted pets in shelters. Now let's ask some questions. What would have to be true for this not to be a problem in the first place? Come up with a few more answers on what you think are some of the underlying issues creating the problem. Hit pause, write down a few ideas, and start again when you're ready. Okay, welcome back. Here are some of the examples of things that you might have written down which could be contributing to the millions of dogs in shelters. Unexpected litters from unsplayed and unneutered dogs. Pets being adopted from shelters by families who don't have an accurate understanding of what it will take to care for the pet and who therefore return the animals quickly. The first step when a problem is presented is to ask yourself, is this the symptom or the problem? Am I dealing with the root problem or the secondary problem that the root problem is creating? What is the real problem at hand? Then look for what's causing the root problem to arise and ask what would have to be true for this problem not to exist in the first place. Another way to test if you're solving a cause or a symptom is to see if solving a particular problem passes the test of time. Will this problem just pop up again in 3 weeks, 3 months, or 3 years? For example, hosting a spring campaign to get more dogs adopted by summer only solves the shelter's overcrowding problem for that summer. These are the types of solutions I see all the time. Ones that require a lot of time and energy and have high signal value that you're doing something, but ones that don't actually really address the root problem. Addressing problems this way gives you a good story to tell, but rarely makes a lasting difference. Eventually you end up exhausted as you never seem to make any real progress. Keeping more pets in homes addresses the problem before it ever makes it to the shelter. Taking steps so that fewer animals have unintentional litters has more of an impact. This is the same experience I had with the tech person coming in to reboot the software. Rebooting the software solved the problem for a week, fixing the software solved the problem for good. When you look at a problem, ask whether fixing it will stand the test of time. If it won't, you aren't solving the root problem. And sometimes that's okay, but it's worth digging into the problem statement to figure out if you can have more of an impact. Finally, if there are multiple people involved in a decision, it's really worth trying to get an agreed upon understanding of the actual problem. Most times when we talk about consensus, we talk about it in the sense of the path forward and not the problem. It's a lot better to have consensus around the problem before talking about the solution, because then you're starting from the same understanding about what you're trying to solve and not arguing solutions that solve different fundamental problems. Recently, a friend of mine was volunteering on a committee meeting with leaders from her community and her local government. A politician had identified a problem. A number of people in their community who were self-employed weren't signing up for health insurance. This was obviously in the United States. The politician gathered together a task force of volunteers to determine if and how their local government could create a new healthcare plan administered by the local government that was more affordable so more people would sign up and get covered for health insurance. When she described what happened on the kickoff call, it sounded like hundreds of business meetings I've been in. Everybody began presenting solutions, each that would address a different problem. One person said they should try to get more people to sign up for more comprehensive plans. Another said they should try to create their own healthcare plan. And another said they should try to encourage more people to contribute to an HSA. And another said they should try to get more people to take action on preventative care. Sound like any meetings you've ever been in? My friend, realizing what was happening, asked to pause the meeting and get clear on the problem. This story not only shows why it's critical to separate problems and solutions, but why it's critical to agree on the root problem. If you don't, you waste tons of money and time addressing symptoms, and the root problem doesn't ever go away. I found a clever way when you're working in a group to get clarity on the problem that works really well. Give everyone a sticky note, or if it's a virtual meeting, ask each participant to email the facilitator the answer to this question. In your own words, what is the problem that we're solving? You'll be amazed by how many different responses there are. Remember, at a high level, a decision involves solving a problem, preventing a future problem, or capitalizing on an opportunity, so that you'll want to tailor the question accordingly. Once you've gathered all the responses, you can perform the same exercises discussed above. For each one, ask, what would have to be true for this problem not to exist? And will solving this problem stand the test of time? Focus on getting clarity on the problem and bar any discussion of solutions until the problem is clear. A great problem statement contains what we want, where we want to go, and what's getting in the way of getting there. Until there's agreement on what the problem is that's being solved, and that the problem is addressing the cause of the issue and not a symptom of it, you'll be constantly addressing symptoms. So let's practice looking for the root problem together. Imagine you were invited to the task force of volunteers as an outside decision-making consultant. You've been brought together to determine if and how our local government could create a new healthcare plan administered by our local government that would get more people to sign up for health insurance. You'll be opening up the meeting. I'd like you to pause the video and write out how you might start the meeting. I also want to note that we're not going for people skills in this skill just yet, so you can skip the pieces about the meeting that you would normally include to build rapport. Let's assume that's all done and you're here just to deliver suggestions. Pause now and write out what you would suggest to the group in their kickoff meeting. Now, this is not the only answer, but here's what I would recommend doing at the volunteer meeting. First, the problem and the solution were not separated when the task force was called, so I'd recommend they first focus on identifying what the problem is and getting agreement on it from everybody involved. Is the problem people who are uninsured or not seeking preventative medical care and end up in ER and unable to afford it? Or is the problem that people can't afford the monthly premiums on lower deductible plans? Second, I'd suggest they only look at what would have to be true for the first problem not to exist in the first place. What if primary care were free for certain income limits in this community? What if at-risk kids were screened in primary school and given free healthcare resources and educated early on? What if high school civics or math classes had mandatory curriculum about navigating health insurance? Obviously, as a Canadian, this isn't a problem we address. I'm not taking a stance here, I'm just saying this particular problem doesn't exist where I am because the upstream problem has been resolved. Don't get me wrong, we've got our own issues. Finally, I'd ask them to look at which problem they could address at the local government level that, if addressed, would make the longest standing difference. So to recap, here's what we want to do to find the root problem and leverage our resources to find the biggest returns and the best outcomes over time. Separate identifying the problem and finding the solution. Ask yourself what would have to be true for this problem not to exist in the first place. See whether solving the problem would stand the test of time. Get agreement on what the root problem is from everybody involved. And have a problem statement that includes what you want to move towards and where you are currently. If you find the root problem before moving into looking at solutions, your resources will go a lot further down the road and give you disproportionately positive results. Instead of addressing symptoms, you'll cure the cause of the problem. Instead of saying yes to inconsequential opportunities, you'll know which ones to take on that will be home runs. And instead of trying to get your team on board after implementation has begun, you'll have everyone on the same page from the beginning. So much of our time is wasted solving the wrong problem. And the number one reason we solve the wrong problem is that our mind is wired to quickly go into action mode. We get an initial view of the problem that makes sense on some level, and we end up jumping straight into solutions. Most of the time, however, we end up solving the wrong problem. Solving the right problem puts you on the path to success. Next week, we're going to learn when to make decisions and when to wait. I'll see you then. We need detailed information to recognize patterns and make decisions. If we intelligently invest our time gathering the right information, we can quickly discern what matters from what doesn't, separate fact from opinion, and hone in on the critical variables in our situation. Not only will we make better decisions, but we'll do it in less time, and that's the key to a harmonious life. But collecting information and learning isn't as straightforward as it seems. When we don't do it right, we consume massive amounts of time, energy, and money, paying a high price. If, however, we know how to learn, how to ask questions, and how to collect relevant information, we can free up time and make better decisions. The first step to mastering this skill is to explore how we learn and what to learn. Too often, the way we go about learning isn't in line with the way the mind actually learns. Most people assume that we automatically learn from experience. We have an experience and we learn. But that's not true. We all know someone with 20 years of experience that really has 1 year of experience repeated 20 times. They didn't learn the first or the second time around, and as a result, they make the same mistakes over and over again. Experience is necessary, but not sufficient for learning. You can learn from experience, it just requires a couple of extra steps. And by experience, I don't just mean your own experience. We learn from other people when we read, have conversations, or watch them navigate situations and problems. Let's think of learning as a loop. The learning loop looks like this. We have an experience, we reflect on that experience, we draw a conclusion or abstraction from that reflection so we know what to do next time, and the abstraction becomes our action, the basis for our next experience. Reflection, not experience, is what leads us to doing something differently the next time. Experience without reflection gives us the illusion of knowledge. You can see now how true learning forms a loop. The most important thing to understand at this point is that reflection is a necessary component of learning. Now let's shift our focus to look at what it is we should learn and how to make sure we put our efforts into learning the most valuable information possible. The truth is, we often treat all sources of information as equally valid, but they aren't. If you think about it, most of what we consume is highlights, summaries, or distillations. We trust these abstractions will save us time and improve our thinking, but they don't. The desire for abstractions is natural. We feel overwhelmed by the amount of information available and unable to keep up with processing it all. But when we rely on abstractions, we're not really learning. And the farther the information is from the first-hand source, the larger the abstraction is likely to be. History shows that the greatest thinkers all used personally collected details. They got out into the world and interacted with it directly. They looked for information that was raw and unfiltered by others. Leonardo da Vinci is a great example of this approach. He kept journals throughout his life, and they contain his notes about how he pursued getting the right information. He writes things like, "Get the master of arithmetic to show you how to square a triangle, and get a master of hydraulics to tell you how to repair a lock, canal, and mill in the Lombardy manner." His journals also contain hundreds of sketches and drawings based on direct and detailed observation. Too often, however, most of us consume information and observations that are multiple degrees removed from their source. Consuming these abstractions gives us another illusion of knowledge. We gain confidence about what to do without understanding why that's what we need to do. My friend Tim Urban has a good metaphor to explain this concept. There are chefs and line cooks. Both can follow a recipe. When things work, there's no difference in the process or the result. However, when things go wrong, the chef knows why. The line cook doesn't. The chef is the one with years of experience, experimentation, and reflection. Here's a great story about the time I learned why it's important not to rely on other people's abstractions. When I worked for the CEO of a large company, nothing crossed his desk without going through me first. I remember walking into his office early one morning after getting an email from one of his managers. They reported on a technical problem they were having affecting operations, and I wanted to flag it for his attention right away. After I told him what had happened, he asked a simple question. "Where did you get this information?" I replied that I heard it from his direct report. The look on his face turned into disappointment almost instantly. Moments passed, and he said this, "The quality of my decisions can't be better than my information." When you're working on the ground, you know what the problem is. By the time that information gets to me, it's been filtered 4 to 5 times. Sometimes when people make poor decisions, everyone wonders how they could make such a stupid decision. Well, I'll tell you how. They're using filtered information to decide with. Your job, Shane, is to make sure I have the raw, unfiltered information. Find out what's really happening, and then we'll talk. But never make decisions based on filtered information someone gives you without verifying it first. His direct report had heard the information from someone who had heard it from someone, so the information wasn't exactly unfiltered. Remember that telephone game in kindergarten? You start with a sentence and whisper it to the next person. After being passed through half the class, it's nothing like the original message. No single person changes it much, but the more people you have passing the message, the farther it gets from the original source and the more changes happen. Well, the same is true with information. As information levels up an organization, it goes through understanding filters, political filters, biases, and more. Details get abstracted and signal is lost. Because your decisions will only be as good as the information you possess, you need to go learn it, see it, and do it for yourself whenever possible. That doesn't mean do everything yourself, but it does mean getting the raw, unfiltered information before you make the decision. That's what we're going to cover in the next part of this video. In summary, there are two important things I want to bring to your attention from what we've just covered. First, reflection is a necessary component of learning. Second, most of the information we consume when we're told we're learning is really just other people's abstractions rather than specific details and understanding. And other people's abstractions are unlikely to help us make better decisions. Now that we understand how we learn, let's talk about how to improve the quality of the information we get. There are three ways to get better information: experiment, go direct to the source and vacuum up the details, and ask better questions. First, run an experiment. The first way to gather better information and gather rich data is just to run an experiment. If you want to know if people will pay for something, try to sell it before you even create it. That's what my friends at Tuft & Needle did. They were one of the first to offer foam mattresses shipped to your house online. Over coffee one day, they shared an incredible story with me. To validate the idea, they set up a landing page, bought some Facebook ads, and took orders. They didn't even have a product or a company. They just wanted to see if people would buy a foam mattress online. After a few days, they refunded all the orders and started the company, now having proof that people would buy their product. Second, go direct to the source. Ideally, you want to get information from someone as close as possible to the problem. There's a difference between reading an academic study and reading a newspaper article on the study. The difference is details. This technique applies in the workplace too. Getting the right information often means going to the person closest to the problem. That doesn't mean you let them define the problem for you. Remember, we never let anyone define the problem for us if we're the decision maker. And it doesn't mean you let them determine the solution. Remember, we own the frame. But you put yourself on the path to success by going to the person closest to the problem and asking questions designed to transfer their experience and reflections to you. That means asking them detailed questions, seeking out rich information, and working to really understand the interconnections and things that matter. So the first principle of gathering great information is, when you want to learn, truly learn, you need to go as close to the source as possible. You want the raw, unfiltered data. You want to be in the weeds. You want to see for yourself. The closer you can get to the direct experience, either by experimenting and learning directly and reflecting upon it yourself, or by going directly to someone who has experienced it and probing them to understand how they came to their conclusions, the more potent and accurate the information will be. One nuance here is you always want to consider the motivations and incentives of the source. You are responsible for filtering the information you let into your mind, and so should only allow high-quality information from high-quality sources in. For example, if you're looking to sell your house, everyone will have a different opinion on what you'll make on the sale. The bank, your real estate agent, the buyer's agent, friends, the home inspector, the internet, and the government, each of them has a different motivation and incentive. Consider the source and consider how they benefit from the information they give you. When the CEO of my company heard how I got the information about his operational issue, he knew he wasn't getting the best information because people had an incentive to cover up their mistakes to make themselves look good. It's natural, but it's destructive. So each time you gather information from someone, ask yourself questions like, how close are they to the problem? What's their motivation or incentive here? What's the source of information if it's not direct? If the information is direct, what do the details look like? The exercise of evaluating the incentive is especially important when you don't have the ability to go and confirm something for yourself. If you absolutely have to rely on someone else's information, don't just ask for details about the situation, question the lens through which they're looking through. Everyone has a perspective. It's your job to piece together the perspectives to get closer to reality. Finally, the third technique for getting better information is to ask the right questions. Don't ask people what they think, ask them how they think. This technique is really part of the previous one. Asking the source the right questions is extremely important, and I'll show you how to do that in a separate video. But I've separated it out because sometimes you can't get to the source and need to rely on secondhand information. So knowing the right questions to ask with these people is equally important. When the source isn't available, the best people to ask are, first, people with broad knowledge in a different area of experience. These are smart people who you can see from the outside of your frame. They don't have to be experts at the subject, just smart friends who are not involved. Second, people who have solved the same or similar problem. These are the experts. But the goal shouldn't be just to get feedback on your particular problem or tell you what to do. It should be to learn how they would go about solving your problem and the variables they consider relevant and how those variables interact with one another over time. If you present a problem and they tell you what to do, they're giving you an abstraction. You haven't learned anything, and if things go wrong, you won't know why. You're the line cook masquerading as the chef. If you ask them how they think about the problem, you're starting to learn. I'm going to spend a little more time on the last way of improving the quality of information you get, because asking the right questions is so critical. One of the worst things you can do is ask someone to solve your problem for you, because when we ask for direct advice, we're being told what to think, not how to think. Perhaps an example will help illustrate. A local government task force is tasked with hiring a software developer for a project, but they have no experience hiring software developers and don't know what to look for. Person A on the task force goes to a developer friend and asks, "Who should I hire for this project?" Person B, on the other hand, goes to a developer friend and says, "I'm hiring a software developer and I'd like to learn from your experiences what skills matter and which ones can be learned. Why? Where do I find the best people? What are the key variables you think about outside of core technical skills that make for a good developer?" And so on. Person B might not have a recommendation within the first conversation, but what do you think the odds are that person B's recommendations will ultimately lead to a better fit? I give it 10 to 1 that person B finds a higher quality candidate. That's because they're asking at the level of systems, not the level of information. Our goal is not just to gain information, but to understand why and how they came to those conclusions. To do this, there are 3 questions I recommend asking, and they apply to both direct sources and quality experts. Notice how different these questions are from, "Here's my problem, what should I do?" First, ask what are the variables you'd use to make this decision if you were in my shoes? How do those variables relate to one another? If I'm looking for the best heart surgeon, I don't just want to ask about their opinion on my heart. I want to ask how to choose a great heart surgeon. So I might ask, what expertise should I look for in a great surgeon to handle my particular case? Second, ask what do you know about the problem that I or others don't? Or what can you see based on your experience that someone without your experience couldn't? In other words, what's important and what's not? Finally, ask what would be your process for making a decision if you were in my shoes? How would you go about doing it? Or how would you go about telling your mother or friend to go about it? To recap, let's apply the 3 techniques of improving the quality of information to an example. Let's say finding a career. First, try to run an experiment. Shadow someone for a day or 2, or do the same type of work for an organization on a volunteer basis. The first-hand information experiences like this provide is invaluable in the decision-making process. Then you go to the source. Find someone doing the job you want. Ask them questions designed to transfer their experience and reflections to you. And remember, when you're asking anyone questions, always consider the motivations and incentives of who is telling you the information, and ask how they think, not what to think. The information you'll apply to your own problem will be powerful far beyond its current application. Finally, in all situations, take the time to craft and ask the right questions. When you interview that person in the field you're looking to get into, instead of asking, "What's your job like?" you ask, "Given what you know now, how would you approach getting into a position like yours if you were starting from where I am?" You could ask them what experiences and skills they're looking for in candidates, or what they know about this career that other people who aren't in the job don't know about it. What if in one conversation you found out this company only hires interns who have worked for them, and they have a hard time filling intern positions? How much time, money, and energy would you save? When you learn not just what someone thinks, but how they think, you start getting raw, unfiltered information and start to find hidden opportunities. I also like to pose these questions to multiple experts within the same domain. If the same variables and processes come up again and again, I've got a good consensus of what I need to look for and do. When you combine the technique of running an experiment, going direct to the source, and asking the right questions, you'll be deeply learning instead of simply consuming, making you a better decision maker now and into the future. You might think that it's too much work to do all of this And in a lot of cases, you're right. But in situations that are irreversible and consequential, you'll want to make the time. General George Patton detailed the value of deep first-hand learning to make better decisions in his book, War as I Knew It, writing, "I took the occasion to examine the German defenses around Cherbourg, both from the ground and from the air. I also had the army engineer make drawings of them, as I felt that the Germans, being methodical people, would probably use the same form of defenses wherever we would meet them." Because of this approach, Patton developed a sixth sense of where the German defenses would be situated whenever he landed in a new spot, and therefore which battle plan gave him the best shot at success. It sounds like work, and it is. It's the work that ordinary people tend to disdain and extraordinary people tend to embrace. Chess grandmasters write down every move of every game they play, a level of effort and attention to detail that novices generally scoff at. Professional athletes watch every pitch, every touch of the puck, and even the way people's hips moves until they can recognize in real time what's about to happen before it happens. All of these techniques for getting information apply to your experience in this program too. The true learning isn't coming from watching videos and hearing my abstractions, it's coming from taking a decision and grappling with it all the way through each lesson. As much as I can point you in the right path, it's up to you to walk it. When you use these skills in the real world, test them, and reflect on them, that's when the material becomes your own. This is a perfect moment to reflect on the skills you've learned so far. How are you thinking about problems and decisions differently? Do you feel any differently about the decision you're faced with? What has your direct experience applying the material been so far? What was it like before to decide, and what's it like now? What skills do you still want to develop? What's still hard? Reflect not just on the information you're getting to make your decision, but on your direct experience of applying these skills so far. And I've got a bonus for those of you who want to reach out to someone who has solved a similar problem, but you're not sure how. This has been a barrier for many people I've worked with, so I've included a bonus section in this lesson on exactly how to reach out to someone to recruit them to help you. Someone who has solved a similar problem can help you see things you haven't anticipated. Someone who has solved this problem often is an expert. Getting even one expert's opinion can cut through a ton of confusion and help you quickly eliminate options. When I first started coding for a living, it was very different from school. In school, you could basically Google things and piece them together. My day job at the intelligence agency was much harder. Not only were we not allowed to Google anything, we were coding, but even if we could, it wouldn't have helped. We were trying to do things that had never been done before. As a kid, I brought a lot of different perspectives to the problem, but I always thought my way was the best way. A few months in, I was really stuck on something. Really stuck. Days went by, weeks went by. I couldn't figure out what was happening. I remember finally approaching someone, head down, like I had failed, and explained what I was stuck on. He said, "Let me look at your code." And in under 20 minutes, he diagnosed what was wrong. There was a nuanced difference between what the documentation said would happen and what actually happened under certain edge cases. No one using it properly would ever run into these edge cases, so it was never documented. He had gone through the same problem, and it had taken him 2 months to figure it out. He was happy to share his knowledge, and while I was a bit sad I had wasted a few weeks because I was stubborn, it kick-started our relationship, and I learned a lot from him over the years. Even one expert's opinion can be more valid than the thoughts and guesses of dozens or even hundreds of amateurs. The goal, as we talked about earlier in this skill, is to go as close to the source as possible to get the information. If you can't reach someone close to the source in your problem, go to someone who's been close to the source in a similar problem. So how do we get experts to actually help us? I've experienced this situation from both sides. I reach out to experts all the time, and I have thousands of people who reach out to me to ask me about my experiences. I want to share what I've learned on how to successfully recruit people, both from having reached out myself and seeing what gets my own attention. First, I want to start with something we all share in common. We all want to help people make a difference. Helping others achieve their goals is what makes life and work meaningful. Experts love to share what they've learned when they know it's going to make a difference. Think about a time in your own life when someone asked you for help on something you excel at and you were able to help them. How did you feel? We often don't want to reach out to experts for help because we simply don't think it's an option, or we're afraid of being a nuisance. Sometimes if we know them, we're embarrassed. Perhaps they think we know more than we actually do know. Of course, not all requests are treated equally. Some requests really don't feel good to receive. Usually, these are the "tell me what I should do" type requests. Often these people haven't done the work ahead of time. They just want you to decide for them. I get hundreds, if not thousands, of these requests a year. People want me to solve their problem for them. Or they don't know what they need, and they want me to solve the problem of what the problem is. So let's talk about how you can ask for help that will set your request apart and get people excited to enlist in helping you see a new perspective. First, have skin in the game and show it. When you reach out to an expert, show them the time, energy, and money you've already invested in solving the problem or coming to a conclusion. Show them you've done the work and that you're stuck. Second, get precise on your ask. Be very clear on what you're looking for. Are you looking for them to review your plan and provide feedback? Are you looking for them to introduce you to people who could solve the problem? Third, show respect for their time and energy. Calling it specifically that they're an expert, that you'll respect their time and energy, and showing how you'll be respectful goes a long way. Ask if they'll offer one-off consulting and what the fee is. Experts are expensive, and most of the time for good reason. If you're paying $1,000 or even $2,000 an hour for something, it forces you to get clear on what you want before you hop on the call. Finally, if you want to build a network and make more than a transactional request, follow up to show your progress no matter what the outcome is. Whether they helped you or not, follow up and keep them updated on progress. This primes your network for help in the future. When people see that their advice was actually taken, they're going to want to help you again. Remember, not all people can help. It's much easier if you develop a personal relationship with people before you need their help, so the request isn't transactional. I just looked at my inbox last week and had 53 requests for help in one way or another. 2 were from friends. I can't reply to them all, so where do you think my time will go? When I see requests that demonstrate you're invested in solving the problem and have done your research to craft a very specific problem that I can help on, I'm happy and eager to respond if I have the time. Compared to that, emails that say something like, "Hey Shane, which stock should I invest in?" Which would you be excited to answer? To sum up, if you do these 4 things, you'll cut down on the time, energy, and resources required to solve your problems, and experts will be willing and excited to help you. To take you as far as possible, I've created an outline for the kind of email that sometimes gets my personal response that I've put in the workbook for this skill. When it comes to engaging with an expert, remember, ask how, not what. Don't interrupt them. You don't have to agree with what they're saying, but you are there to learn from them, not the other way around. Your goal is learning how to think better, not solving your current problem. We want each decision to make our future easier than our present. Each decision is a hypothesis and an experiment about what will happen in the future, but we can never quite know if we've improved the future until outcomes have come to pass. If we act too soon on the information we gather, we miss out on vital information that could change our decision. And if we act too late, we miss out on opportunity. So how do we know when to keep gathering information and when to act? And how is it that some people can confidently move forward with a decision even when they're missing information, while others seem to spin out even after they have all the information they need? After working with thousands of people, I've seen both ends of the spectrum, deciding too soon and deciding too late. And I've found a framework that helps them both. It gets people who are risk averse to act and people who are too optimistic and risk tolerant to wait until they gather more information. It starts with the same framework we covered at the beginning of the course, the reversible versus consequential matrix. As a leader, you really want to think about the pace of decision making. The more irreversible and consequential a decision is, the more we want to wait and gather information until the last possible moment before making a decision. Bad decisions are the result of information we wish we knew at the time of the decision, so it makes sense that we'd want to wait and gather information. When using the matrix, we also need to add a simple heuristic for when to gather more information and when to act on the information we have. We can think of this as soon as possible or as late as possible. What we want to avoid is spinning out in the middle. Let's dig into what we mean. On one end, you have ASAP, as soon as possible, and on the other end, you have ALAP, as late as possible. We'll consider this our x-axis. On our y-axis is how useful the information we gather will be in terms of improving our outcomes. When decisions are easily reversible or inconsequential, moving slow and letting them linger and occupy mental space is the biggest risk. If you can take something back or it doesn't really matter, gathering too much information becomes a drain on resources. If you've ever bought a mattress, you'll know exactly what I mean. You spend hours, if not days, looking at mattresses, reviews, prices, and considering if you're a hot or cold sleeper. You think about it ad nauseum. And then you finally pick a mattress and get it delivered only to find out that it isn't what you dreamed of. So you exchange it for your next option anyways. You could have saved hours or even days picking one within an hour and just making sure it had a flexible return policy and moving on. If the decision is reversible and inconsequential, make it as soon as possible. You'll save time, energy, and resources that you can use to make decisions that really matter. This works in a team too. When you delegate these decisions to the right person, it allows them to build up their judgment and motivates them. When you slow down reversible and inconsequential decisions, it's really demotivating. If the decision is irreversible and consequential, you want to gather as much information as possible before deciding. The biggest risk here is moving too fast and missing something. When the stakes are high and you can't take it back, you want to decide as late as possible. That is, decide at the very last minute. You want to keep as many choices on the table as possible while learning more information while you wait. Let's answer the big burning question. How do you know when it's time to finally act? Anyone who has held on to a job, a relationship, or investment too long knows that there's a point of diminishing returns on information gathering. When it comes to decision making, we reach a point where we find ourselves poring over the same information over and over and over again, or having the same argument, or paying to fix the same problem. In this case, we're suffering in the moment since we're unable to gather more useful information. But like all things, waiting as long as possible has diminishing returns. A quick shorthand for when it's time to stop deliberating or gathering more information, and when it's time to act is stop, flop, or no. When you stop gathering useful information, when you first lose an opportunity or flop, or when you have gathered a critical piece of information that makes the choice clear, you know it's time to act. The goal of having these set red flags for when you've been waiting too long is to help those of us who overanalyze, over-deliberate, and hold on longer than necessary. I have a friend who works with engineers who said they all tend to be risk-averse, so they wait as long as possible to decide. The problem is they don't know when to act. He told me, they keep thinking that gathering more data will make things firmer, but they've already been prototyping and gathering information for months. They don't know when to stop. They start losing interest in the problem too, because all they're doing is having meetings and aligning and gathering information and writing up a giant document laying out how they made their decision. They're all aware of basic decision-making skills, but they really struggle to know when enough is enough. If that sounds like you, then the 3 red flags of stop, flop, or no can really help you figure out when it's time to stop deliberating and start acting. I'm sharing these with you before we dive into the framing the problem better or analyzing options so that you know ahead of time what signs to look for that you're spending too much time deliberating. Let's dive into these 3 action triggers. First, act when you've stopped gathering useful information. Just like the engineers, this is the problem most people encounter. So I want to share with you why more information isn't always better and signs that you've gathered enough information. I want to start by reading an abbreviated excerpt from Tribe of Mentors about a horse racing study by Paul Slovak. In 1974, Paul Slovak, a world-class psychologist and peer of Nobel laureate and Knowledge Podcast guest Daniel Kahneman, decided to evaluate the effect of information on decision-making. Slovak gathered 8 professional horse handicappers and announced, "I want to see how well you predict the winners of horse races." Slovak told them the test would consist of predicting 40 horse races in 4 consecutive rounds. In the first round, each gambler would be given 5 pieces of information he wanted on each horse, which would vary from handicapper to handicapper. One of them might want the years of experience of the jockey had as one of the top 5 variables, while another might not care about that at all, but want the fastest speed any given horse had achieved in the past year, or whatever. Finally, in addition to asking the handicappers to predict the winner of each race, he asked each one also to state how confident they were in their prediction. There were an average of 10 horses in each race, so we would expect by blind chance, random guessing, that each handicapper would be right 10% of the time and that their confidence with a blind guess would be 10%. In round 1, with just 5 pieces of information, the handicappers were 17% accurate, which is pretty good, 70% better than the 10% chance they started with when given 0 pieces of information. And interestingly, their confidence was 19%, almost exactly as confident as they should have been. They were 17% accurate and 19% confident in their predictions. In round 2, they were given 10 pieces of information. In round 3, 20 pieces of information. And in the 4th and final round, 40 pieces of information. That's a whole lot more than the 5 pieces of information they started with. Surprisingly, their accuracy had flatlined at 17%. They were no more accurate with the additional 35 pieces of information. Unfortunately, though, their confidence nearly doubled to 34%. So the additional information made them no more accurate, but a whole lot more confident, which would have led them to increase the size of their bets and lose money as a result. Beyond a certain minimal amount, additional information only feeds what psychologists call confirmation bias. And that's leaving aside the considerable cost of delay and acquiring information. The information we gain that conflicts with our original assessment or conclusion, we conveniently ignore or dismiss, while the information that confirms our original decision makes us increasingly certain that our conclusion was correct. In our lives and the lives of people I've worked with, there's some signs that you've hit the limit of useful information you can gather. You're Googling things in a panic to learn more. You're asking people for advice who are more than one step removed or don't have experience in solving these problems. You're going over the same information or the same argument more than once. When you've hit any of these points, you've got all the information you're going to get that's useful, and it's time to decide. That's stop. You've stopped gathering useful information. Now let's talk about flop, your first lost opportunity. If you're facing an irreversible and consequential decision, and your goal is to hold out on deciding as long as possible, your red flag for when you have to decide with the information you have is when you're starting to lose opportunity. Remember, the goal of as long as possible is to preserve optionality. When options start diminishing, you know it's time to act. When selling a house, maybe you want to wait as long as possible to actually sell. You can go so far as to list it, put a price on it, and get offers. But if buyers start walking away or you're about to break a legal contract, then you're losing options and it's time to act. If you're having that conversation with your partner about taking your relationship to the next level, be it going steady, living together, or getting engaged and married, those are big defining moments. If your partner wants to live together and you're not sure and want to spend some more time with them first, eventually they're going to get fed up and walk away. Right before they do, you're about to lose options and you know it's time to decide. That's flop. You wait as long as possible to decide until your first material lost opportunity. Finally, when you know, sometimes it's a critical piece of information that you've gathered that confirms your decision. Sometimes in more ambiguous situations like relationship, it's a gut feeling that doesn't go away or change. When you know what you're going to do, it's time to put the gears into motion. Again, you don't have to announce it. You don't even have to do the main act yet, like firing somebody or quitting your job or buying the house. But if you know it's time to act on the information you have and move from deliberating to putting it into action. If you've waited as long as possible and you've hit stop, flop, or no, prepare to commit 100%. Whatever you do, commit to deciding as soon as possible or as late as possible. You can avoid spinning out in the middle by identifying what information you need to gather and act as soon as you're repeating yourself or getting away from the primary sources of information, which will teach you to. Identifying what opportunities you'll lose by waiting and acting as soon as one is gone. Identifying what information, if gathered, would change the course of everything and bring you clarity. If you're feeling like your decision is an as late as possible decision and you want to preserve as much optionality for the future as possible, the next video in this lesson is how to do exactly that. Our current reality is a result of our past decisions. From our perspective today, we can clearly look back at which decisions and behaviors landed us where we are. If we're in a happy relationship, we look back and see years of effort, communication, negotiation, luck, and possibly therapy that went into getting to this point. If we're operating a successful business, we can see how running lean at the right times and doubling down on the right things led us to where we are. If we wake up tired, we can see how we spent too much time on our phone last night instead of sleeping. Wouldn't it be nice if we could create a telescope into the future so we can anticipate what problems and opportunities might arise as a result of the decisions we make today? One of the ways we can make the hindsight of our future selves the foresight of our current selves is to use thought experiments. Most people think the future is just like the weather. It just happens to us, but it's not. We create the future with our choices today. A study conducted in 1989, performed by Deborah Mitchell, J. Edward Russo, and Nancy Pennington, found that imagining that an event has already occurred increases our ability to correctly identify reasons for the future outcomes by 30%. Basically, thought experiments allow us to time travel and understand how our choices today impact our future reality. Before we dive into how to capitalize on our ability to imagine the future, it's important to understand that thought experiments are not daydreams. There's a lot more rigor to them. I'm now going to show you how to imagine the future you want to happen, so the roadmap of decisions, circumstances, and actions required to arrive there becomes clear. We'll also create a roadmap of which barriers or circumstances will result in failure. See, rather than trying to catch ourselves when we're caught up in cognitive biases with a checklist that doesn't actually work, we can adopt the automatic behavior of looking into the future to put us on the path to success. First, we'll talk about arriving at the positive future, and next, avoiding the negative one. Forecasting is what we do when we anticipate what will happen. We're predicting the future. But when we think in this forward direction, we're more prone to falling prey to overconfidence. We tend to overestimate what our return on investment will be, whether financially or even in terms of happiness, and we underestimate the amount of work it will take. A much more effective technique is to work backwards. When we imagine we've already arrived at success, we can then backcast into the past and see more clearly what it took to get to the ideal outcome. Working backwards allows us to reverse engineer the amount of effort something takes and reduce overconfidence bias. It also allows us to turn a murky goal into specificity and transform our insights into action. Finally, it helps us to identify what might derail our efforts, and therefore backcasting gives us the opportunity to anticipate and address roadblocks before they arise. You can think of it this way. Forecasting is standing at base camp and looking to the summit and anticipating the route you're going to take. You can see where you want to go, and you can see a few hundred feet in front of you, but you can't see more. Backcasting is the opposite. It's looking from the summit to base camp, and you're identifying the exact path you took to get there. One example of how backcasting inspires action that changes outcomes in a real-life context is a voter turnout experiment performed in the United States. In 2008, a study was conducted by David Nickerson to determine if voter turnout would increase by having canvassers go door to door and ask a few simple questions. First, they asked people to self-identify whether or not they intended to vote by asking, "Are you planning on voting in the upcoming election?" Simply by identifying a goal and responding that they did intend to vote improved voter turnout by 2%. That might not seem like a lot, but when elections in the US are often won by razor-thin margins, that's incredibly significant, especially when you put it in the context of a lot of research suggesting that all of those mailers and professional phone calls from campaigns have no impact at all on voter turnout. For something to increase turnout by 2% is a massive change. But what made an even bigger impact than confirming they would vote was going a step farther and making a plan to vote. Nickerson found that when canvassers help people intending to vote identify barriers and create if-then plans, it increased voter turnout by 4.1%, enough to sway an entire election. After that study, organizations started talking to voters on their doorstep about making a plan to vote. It's now commonplace in the US for canvassers to go door to door asking voters to first identify if they're planning on voting, in other words, naming the goal they want for themselves, then asking them to think about their plans for election day, often in reverse. They'll inquire about things like, do you know where your polling place is? Where will you be coming from when you vote? What time of day do you think you will be voting? By imagining voting, then thinking through what it would take to get there, voters uncover small hiccups that could have derailed their plan. like a doctor's appointment that wouldn't leave them with the time to pick up the kids and vote, or that the polling place had moved. By thinking about the goal, voting, and then working through how they would get there, they're able to anticipate what it would take to execute their plan and achieve their goal. Let's try a version of backcasting ourselves. In Thinking in Bets, Annie Duke describes how to begin conducting a backcast thought experiment. She says, "We imagine we've already achieved a positive outcome, holding up a newspaper with the headline, 'We achieved our goal,' and then we think about how we got there." So regarding the decision you're trying to make, write out what your ideal future is. What is it you want to achieve? Think of the positive outcome that's worthy of the headline news. If you need help, check out the skill, The Most Important Thing. Take some time to place yourself in that ideal future. The goal is to work backwards. To do that, you need to mentally elaborate on what your ideal future is like. What makes it ideal? What does your life look like? Describe a day in that ideal future in as much detail as you can. Once you've got a clear idea in your mind, ask yourself, what did I do in order to arrive there? In other words, what behaviors, what decisions, and what actions did you have to take in order to get where you're now trying to go? When you're doing this exercise, watch out for the tendency to slip into what you have to do to get from where you are now to where you want to be. So instead of, I'll have to talk to this person and get this information, frame it as in order to get success, I talked to this person and I got that information. Keep focused on what you did do. The shift is subtle, but it changes responses from things that are often outside of our control or ambiguous to things we have direct control over. If you're struggling, pause and break the path down into tiny steps. If you think back to the analogy of standing on the summit and looking back to base camp, the first part of the path you want to identify is the last step you took to get on the summit. You don't look all the way down to base camp. You look down at the rock and snow just below the summit ledge and ask yourself, what was the last step I took to get me on the summit? Once you identify that step, you go to the one before that, and so on until you're back at base camp. Apply the same thinking to your decision. Now that you have your path, come back to the present and write down the following. When you're 3/4 of the way there, what are the signs you're on the right track to get to your ideal future? What are the signs at the halfway point that you're on the right track? When in time will the halfway point be? What are the signs that you can measure? Finally, what are the signs in the near future that you're headed on this path? What will you have done or not done that means you're on track for the best case scenario? The thought experiment of backcasting helps us shift away from our tendency to spend too much time thinking about what life will be like when we arrive at the end of the goal that we want and spend more time accurately assessing and planning how we get there. It's the difference between wanting a great relationship and hoping it happens versus committing in advance to how you'll handle hiccups and miscommunication. It's the difference between abstractly wanting a great business that survives market turmoil and actually saving more when things are going well. And it's the difference between wanting to wake up early in the morning and setting an alarm, not just for 6 a.m. the next day, but setting an alarm for 9 p.m. tonight so you'll put your devices away and get to bed. Pause the video now and take the time to describe your ideal future and work backward on what's required to get there. Okay, now let's talk about imagining our worst case futures so we can avoid arriving there. Gabrielle Ottingen, who specializes in researching motivation, has found that positive thinking and daydreaming about what things will be like when we reach a goal actually results in little progress towards our goals. Elaborating only on what life will be like without thinking about how hard it will be to get there can actually hurt us because we're not preparing for the inevitable pitfalls and obstacles. Her research over the past 20 years backs this up in a myriad of contexts. Fantasizing about what we do want is helpful, but only when it's paired with imagining what will also get in the way. Her research on how people can turn their positive fantasies about the future into binding goals using mental contrasting, in other words, looking for what can go wrong or what can get in the way, has repeatedly demonstrated the success of this technique in a wide range of contexts. In one study, students preparing for an exam who used mental contrasting completed 60% more exam prep questions than the control group. In another study, using this method increased the amount of veggies and fruits middle school-age girls consumed for the entire course of the 2-year study. These results were achieved by asking people to anticipate the obstacles they would encounter on the way to the goal and to come up with a plan on how they would overcome them. Anticipating obstacles allows us to avoid them, and if we can't, we at least have a plan for what we'll do when they're encountered. In other words, she encourages people to be negative and think about what won't work and how to deal with what won't work. In business circles, anticipating what won't work is often called a premortem. A postmortem happens after the fact and tells us what the cause of death was. A premortem, however, tells us why a project, idea, or decision will fail before it fails, so we can try to prevent the failure. Having already experienced failures, many of us already know what could get in the way of our goals. We make it explicit, it helps us develop a plan for how to respond. So now, instead of your ideal future, imagine you've arrived at your worst case scenario. The decision you've made has turned out terribly. Just like the headline in the previous exercise touted something incredible, the headline now reads your worst fear. Regarding the decision you're trying to make, write out what is the worst case scenario, the outcome that'll make the headlines. Then think back to how you've arrived at the worst case scenario. Exactly like in the positive scenario, you want to break the steps down as small as you can. For example, if your worst case scenario is that everyone hates your new product, you could start with imagining a consumer writing a review saying they'll never buy it again. What happened in the moment before that? Maybe they were frustrated. Why were they frustrated? The product didn't deliver. How? Was it too hard to use? Did it break? Were they not the right target consumer? Keep working backwards. What was the marketing that got them to buy it? Or which part broke? Where was that sourced? Maybe the directions weren't clear. As you can see, when you start with the results, you're then able to explore and identify all the potential causes going all the way back to the decision you are now facing. Now that you've identified your path from hell, come back to the present and ask yourself, what are the signs at the halfway point that you're on the wrong track? Signs you can measure. What are the signs in the near future that you're headed down the wrong path? What will you have done or not done that means you're on track for the worst case scenario? I hope these thought experiments helped you get clarity on the actions you need to take to reach your goals. However, we don't just want to get clear on what it will take to arrive at the outcomes we want. We also want to know what problems and opportunities we'll likely face when we arrive even at the best outcomes. We've got one more thought experiment for you coming up next, so you can think through where you'll be once you arrive at your potential outcomes. Welcome to the first lesson, where we're learning how to tackle big decisions. But just before we do that, I want to start with what decisions are. What is a decision? What is their actual functional purpose? Decisions are the choices we make to overcome existing problems, avoid future problems, or seize opportunities. While a lot of people fear and avoid decisions, by embracing them instead and intentionally learning how to master them, we step out of a passive role in our lives and into an active one. We step into a leadership role. When you step back and think about it, most people spend their time cleaning up or suffering the consequences of poor decisions in work or life. This is why we feel so busy all the time in every sphere. Most of our time is spent correcting poor initial decisions. We have no time and space to work, let alone do the work required to make better decisions. We're barely hanging on. When we're stuck putting out fires, it distracts us from what we really need and what we want to do to move forward. On the other hand, good decision-making compounds over time to yield more time, energy, and leverage in future decisions. Good decisions make things easier in the future. But it doesn't just compound to benefit the decision maker. Good decision-making compounds within families, communities, and businesses too. Like the parent who decided to get their finances in order years before their passing so they don't burden their children with medical or funeral debt. They made the future easier by acting today. Or like the CEO who decided to run lean and was able to keep staff on throughout the economic turmoil. They put the company in a position to survive a wider range of outcomes. Or like the solopreneur who decided to focus on building a flexible career so they can be present for their spouse and family. When just one person, like you, takes the time to develop their decision-making skills, it has a long-lasting impact not only on your life, but on the lives of those around you. So where do we start? The lead domino decisions. We believe that decisions fall into a matrix of consequential versus inconsequential and reversible versus irreversible. When we think back on the decisions we've made in life, the ones we remember are the big, irreversible, and consequential decisions. We don't remember what we ate for lunch a month ago, which shirt we did or didn't end up buying 5 years ago, or what the rate of return was for most of our investments. If a decision is inconsequential or it's reversible, you can change your mind easily with little impact to your life if the original outcome isn't quite what you want. You live to see another day and make another decision with the same minimal impact. On the other hand, we have consequential and irreversible decisions. These are the decisions that change the trajectory of our lives. Who we form partnerships with, what career we choose, where we live, which house or even which business to buy. Consequential and irreversible decisions are what some people call lead dominoes. Remember when you were a kid and you stacked up dominoes in a line, and when you pushed the first one in the line down, the rest fell sequentially? That's a lead domino. When you make a great decision about your career, problems like, how will I pay the bills, or how will I see my family, or can I afford this care for myself in the future, are more likely to disappear. When you make a great decision about where to live or how to invest, you also eliminate big future problems. So that's where we recommend applying this program and the skills you'll learn first, to consequential and irreversible decisions. But don't worry, if you're experiencing some trepidation about tackling something so large, we're going to show you how to break it down and make the most progress. Now, will smaller decisions benefit from this process? Absolutely. Decisions are a bit like playing Tetris. When you make a decision well, problems disappear and the future becomes easier. People might not even know you made a good decision because problems were just prevented. But if you make it poorly, consequences and decisions keep stacking up and it gets harder and harder to clear away the problems. When you have good decision-making hygiene in the biggest areas, it's like cleaning up your diet versus flossing. Your diet is a big cornerstone piece of your health. Flossing is a smaller piece. Both are good for your health, but improving your diet will leave a bigger and more immediate impact. And coincidentally, it can help improve your dental hygiene as well. So for this course, we're going to focus our energy on the irreversible and consequential decisions in order to remove the biggest hurdles and eliminate the most problems in the future. Let's tackle those big decisions starting right now. And hey, if you don't have a big, irreversible, consequential decision at hand, that's just fine. Someday you will, and the strategies you learn in this course will be there for you when you need them. After working with thousands of people on decision making, I found there's typically two types of people. Those who are currently facing a challenging problem they want to work through and solve as soon as possible, and those that are proactively studying decision making to prepare for the future. Both will benefit tremendously from this course. First, let's get clear about the decisions you're facing today. Grab the worksheet. I'd like you to first write down all the decisions that are on your mind taking up your mental energy today. This can be in work, in life, in finances, whatever. Just get these down on paper. It's amazing to me how much catharsis it can bring to simply get all of the decisions swirling around in our head onto something concrete. When they're out on paper, we can begin to tackle them. They're no longer intangible. Pause now and list them out. Okay, now let's look at where these decisions fit on the irreversible versus consequential matrix. Out of all the decisions you're making, choose 1 to 3 that will have the largest impact on your day-to-day life and future. Which ones are consequential and irreversible? Pause the video now and write out the decisions on the matrix. Now, if you have a consequential and irreversible decision you're grappling with right now, like what should I do with my life? Am I in the right partnership? How should I respond to this crisis? Let's start by breaking this decision down into the next smallest decisions. Big, irreversible, and consequential decisions are usually dozens, if not hundreds or even thousands of smaller decisions that combine to result in one big decision, problem, or opportunity. If you're trying to decide which career to pursue, maybe the smallest next decision is, do I want to become a veterinarian? Or how long do I want to invest in going back to school? If we're trying to decide how to respond to a stagnant or failing business, the smaller decision might be, how much runway do we have? Where can we cut back? Or what do we need to invest in to innovate? If it's a relationship we're considering, perhaps it's, do I want the same future as this person? How do I feel when I'm around this person? Do I feel the same, challenged, or content? Another way to think about breaking down a decision like this is what decisions are less consequential or more reversible that will help me sort out this big decision. So how can you break down this one big decision into smaller parts that fit into other areas in the matrix? The more we can move decisions from the top right corner to other quadrants and make decisions that are more reversible and less consequential, the more we can get clarity, mitigate our risks, and keep ourselves in the best position to respond to the information we gather and change course. If you have one of these big decisions, pause now and break the decision down into smaller decisions, less consequential or more easily reversible. Once you've done that, I'd like you to choose one smaller decision that will have the most impact on the path you're choosing and work through this program with that piece first. For example, if you're trying to decide which career to pursue, the smaller decision that would have the biggest impact might be, What is it that I'm good at and want to do? What will allow me to earn good money? If you're trying to decide about a partnership, maybe it's, what do I want for my future? Is that in alignment with what they want? If you're trying to decide about where to direct your company, maybe it's what gaps exist in this market that we're in the best position to fill. Pause now and choose which one piece will have the biggest impact. Circle it, underline it. This will be your starting place. For those of you who just broke down your big, consequential, and irreversible decision, I want you to focus on just the next smallest part of the decision while using this program. Once you've begun developing the skills and have evaluated for yourself which parts work for you and the situation you're in, you'll be able to repeat the process with the remaining components. The next time through, you can tackle the next 2 or 3 of these smaller decisions simultaneously. If you have no big, consequential, irreversible decisions at hand right now, to get the most out of this course, we recommend focusing on 1 to 3 decisions you're facing that are consequential but reversible. This will allow you to practice the skills and commit to the decision you've made so you can gather feedback from your own process before applying it to more irreversible areas of your life. This might look like which car to buy or other investment that's significant but not life-altering if it goes poorly, which city to live in, which career to investigate, not necessarily change to. Working through this program will prepare you for when more significant choices arise. Remember, decisions are like the blocks that fall in Tetris. By cleaning up these consequential, smaller decisions, you'll have more space to deal with bigger decisions when they happen. And there's a good chance that these decisions are part of a larger one that hasn't surfaced yet. Now you might say, but these decisions are reversible. No, they're not. But just because the decision is reversible doesn't mean it's easy to do, which is why our decision-making skills are important for all consequential decisions. They're consequential often because they take a lot of resources to reverse or because they have big impacts on the future. Work through the entire course on a few of these consequential but reversible decisions simultaneously. If at any point you're overwhelmed, limit the scope and narrow it down to fewer decisions. Keep in mind, it's more important to finish the entire program than it is to tackle multiple decisions or even do the program perfectly. Working through multiple decisions at once will give you the ability to see how these techniques can be applied in different contexts. And what if you have no big consequential decisions to make right now? It doesn't always happen, but occasionally I've met people who are in a position where they feel they don't have any consequential decisions on the horizon. If that's the case for you, borrow one from your future. What might be a consequential decision in 1 to 3 years from now? Here's a list of things I found most people grapple with at some point in their lives. Where do I want to be in 5 to 10 years? Where do I want to invest in order to reach my financial goals? How will I care for my parents as they age? What is the legacy work that I want to leave behind? Choose one of these and dive in. Next up, we're going to learn the skill that should be utilized first with every decision you make, determining what the most important thing is. No matter what problem or opportunity arises, knowing the most important thing directs everything else. While problems come and go, the skills that put us on the path to success stay the same. Once we've learned how to establish the most important thing, we'll make sure the decision you're facing actually helps you achieve the most important thing. We wouldn't want to just solve a symptom if we're trying to cure the cause. Okay, that wraps up this lesson, but the work is just beginning. Your homework this week is to practice what you've learned. See you next week.